Improve. The next value chain activity I want to focus on is the improve value chain activity. The purpose of the improve value chain activity is to ensure continual improvement of our products, services, and practices across all of our value chain activities and the 4 dimensions of IT service management. We take a lot of different inputs into the improve activity. We're going to be looking at things like product and service improvement information that we get back from deliver and support. As we talk about deliver and support, these are your operations personnel. They're the ones who are running the service desk and running all the servers and the services. So they're constantly getting feedback from your end users, from your consumers, and from your customers. We also want to take stakeholders' feedback in from the engage process. As we look at that, that might be things between us and our suppliers, or us and our partners, or us and our consumers. All of that is information that's coming back in through Engage, and Engage is going to take that and pass it over to the improve activity so improvements can be made based on that feedback. We also want to look at the performance information and improvement opportunities that are provided from all of the different value chain activities. As we're measuring things across the life cycle and across all of our processes and activities, we want to make sure that's being fed back to improvement so we can figure out how can we do things better, cheaper, faster, more efficient, whatever the case may be. We're always trying to improve to get more value for less cost. And then we also want to look at all of the knowledge and information about our new and changed products and services from design and transition and obtain build. So as we're going through and building a new server or a new service, we want to get that information and pass it back to improve, because then improve can look at it and make suggestions and recommendations of how to do this better, cheaper, faster, etc., right? We also are going to look at all of the knowledge and information about our third-party service components from the Engage perspective. So the improvement is also going to get information from Engage, from our partners and our suppliers, because maybe our supplier is moving from a self-hosted environment into a cloud environment, and that new information can factor into our planning for improvements in the future. When we start talking about outputs from the improve process, this is going to be things like improvement initiatives and plans for all of the other value chain activities. The improve is looking across the entire service value chain and service value system. And as they look at that, they're going to figure out, hey, build and obtain, you guys could have done this for half the price if you had done thing X. And they'll make that recommendation or that plan of how to do it better next time. We're also going to have value chain performance information from plan and from the governing body. As we get that information, we're going to be able to pass that back out to those folks and make sure that we can use that improved information out across the field. Also, we're going to be looking at our improved status reports for all the value chain activities. As we've taken all this information in from everybody and we figure out how we're going to improve it, we're going to put those status reports back out and say, here are the recommendations and here's how you can improve things. Again, it's that whole idea of continual improvement over and over again. If we have recommendations for contracts and agreements, we're not going to give those directly to the consumers or the service providers or any of our suppliers. Instead, we're going to pass that back to Engage because they're going to be our conduit to all of those external agencies. And so that's the way we're going to do that with any improvements for contracts or agreement language. And finally, we have our service performance information for design and transition. As we get all of that information and we look at how we can improve it, we're also going to push that back to design and transition so they can design and transition better services next time around. This all goes back to the bottom line of continual improvement. When we're thinking about the value chain activity of improve, just think, how can we make things better, faster, cheaper, easier, better functionality, whatever the case may be. However we can move and get more improvement and better results, that's the idea inside the improve activity. The next value chain activity we're going to cover is the engage value chain activity. The purpose of the engage value chain activity is to provide a good understanding of the stakeholder needs, to ensure continual engagement with all of the stakeholders is occurring, and to promote good transparency and good relationships with all of our stakeholders. Really, when we talk about engage, think about going out and talking to other people. That's what we're really doing at the heart of this engage process. This is going to be going out to our stakeholders both internally and externally to our organization. So when I think about the different inputs to the engage activity here, I'm thinking about the product and service portfolio that I'm going to get from plans. When I get the product and service portfolio, I then can think about who do I need to start engaging with? Who needs to know about this new roadmap? Who needs to know that there's a new product coming online? Who needs to know what they can provide into that service or that part of that service portfolio? That's the whole idea there, is communicating that inward and outward across the organization and out to your partners. Also, we're going to be looking for inputs for high level of demand for services and products. This is something we're going to see usually from our customers. And so as part of Engage, we're going to listen to our customers and what they want. For example, if I have 100 students who reach out to me and tell me, hey Jason, I want you to start offering X certification product, we might start listening to that and go build that certification and put that into our plans and move that throughout our whole life cycle, right? It all depends on what the demand is for our services and our products, and we listen to our customers on that. One of the reasons why we offer the Prince 2 certification is because a lot of my Itil students had said, hey, I want to get a project management certification. Will you offer Prince 2? And so we went out because we had a large enough demand and we did that. Another input is the request and feedback you get from your customers. As you go through this course, we ask for reviews and feedback from you. If you tell us that you don't like it because Jason talks too long in his examples, then next time we build a course, we'll use less examples. We've gotten a lot of that type of feedback over the years of things we can change and make better, and we implement that each and every time. You want to do the same thing with your IT services. You're always wanting to get feedback from your customers, and then using that feedback, you can make a better product. Next, we also want to think about the incidents, the service requests, and feedback from your end users. This may be different from your customers, right? In my case, my customers are my users. But if we look at this from a large IT stance, I might have a customer who buys a service for hundreds of users underneath them. In that case, I need to think about the feedback differently from the customer level and from the user level. When you take all that input in, it helps you in your engagement to figure out what you're doing right, and then you can pass that information over to the improve process so they can then work it into improvement plans. Also, another input we have is information on the completion of user support tasks from delivery and support. One of the big things that your Engage is going to be working closely with is delivery and support, because in delivery and support, that's where your service desk comes into play. That's where your operations comes into play. That's where you're going to be reaching out and touching your end users and getting their feedback directly. So being able to look at that and feeding that information back through deliver and support into the Engage process and from Engage out to the other parts of the service value chain is really important. Next, we also want to consider an input of our market opportunities. As we look at the market and we see what the demand looks like and the opportunities, we can then figure out what our current and potential customers and users might want. And based on that and seeing that and engaging with the marketplace, we can determine and feed that back into plans to put it into the overall strategy for the company. Another input is making sure we have cooperation opportunities and feedback being provided by not just our customers and our users, but also from our partners and our suppliers. For example, we rely on AWS or Amazon Web Services to host our website currently. We want to make sure we have a good partnership with them, or at least a good supplier relationship, where we can talk to them and figure out what other services do you offer that might be able to help us? What type of opportunities exist? And understanding those opportunities for cooperation and feedback from our partners and suppliers can help us to better supply a service to our end user. Another input we have is our contracts and our agreement requirements. As we look at all of those from across the entire value chain, we also are going to be doing all of the engagement. Anytime we're talking about contracts and agreements, you can be assured we're talking about the Engage activity because we're reaching outside of our organization to make that contract happen. Another thing we're going to get as an input to our Engage activity is the knowledge and information about new and changed products and services, both from design and transition and obtain and build. You'll notice some of these things have happened in multiple different activities. Why? Because this is a coordinated and interlinked effort. Next, we have our knowledge and information about our third-party service components from suppliers and partners. Just like we did before, we have that again here inside the Engage activity. We also want to make sure we're getting product and service information from across the lifecycle and from the deliver and support team. As they feed that into us, we can then coordinate it and push it out across all of the different pieces and the different activities in our service value chain. Next, we also have our improvement initiatives and plans. We're going to get those from Improve, and as the engagement folks, what are we going to do with those? Well, we're going to tell people about them. Hey students, we're improving the course and releasing a new course on X day. We get that from the plans, and then we pass it out to our customers, our users, and our consumers. And finally, we also want to get improvement status reports from Improve. And then again, we can share that information out as part of Engage. When I think about engage, I always like to think about telling people something. I'm communicating with somebody, right? So what are some of the outputs we have when we talk about engage? Well, we have consolidated demands and opportunities. As we collected all that information from the marketplace and our customers, we're now going to turn around, consolidate it, and pass it over to plans so they can put that into our overarching plans. We're also going to look at our product and service requirements that we got, and we're going to give those to design and transition so they can build better services. We're also going to take the user support tasks and requirements and give those over to delivery and support so they can actually provide the end users what they need. So if you as a student come to the engage part of our company and say, I need more study guides, then we can then pass that over to design and transition, who can design it. Then we can give it to obtain and build, who will build it. And then we give it to deliver and support, who will deliver it to you as a student. And it works that way where these processes are interrelated. We're also going to have an output of improvement opportunities and stakeholder feedback. As we collect all of that, because we're the ones interacting with all of those external organizations, we're going to take that and pass it over to the improved process or activity so they can work with it. We're also going to get things like change or project initiative requests, and we're going to get all of those, consolidate them, and pass them over to the obtain build. Again, we're dealing with contracts, right? And agreements. And if we get those contracts and agreements from the external and internal suppliers, we're then going to pass those over to obtain and build and design and transition so that they can get the services and products that those contracts rely upon. We're also going to be looking at the output of knowledge and information about our third-party service components because we collected all that information, but we as Engage aren't going to do much with it. Instead, we want to pass it to the plans folks, the design folks, the transition folks, the obtain and build folks, the deliver and support folks. All of them need this information, and we're the people who collect it, so we're responsible for passing it back out. And finally, one of the things we collected was service performance reports, right? We got all of that information from all of the different parts of the service, and now we want to communicate that back out to our customers. Hey, our availability is 99.999% as measured by X, Y, and Z. Let me give that report to the customers so they know what they're getting. That's the idea in Engage. Engage is the glue that makes all of this service work. It's all of the communication that occurs. Things come in, things get processed, and things get pushed out to and from all of the different activities, processes, customers, stakeholders, consumers, and suppliers and partners. All of that works because Engage is at the center of it. It's all the people who make the communication happen. Design and transition. This is the next value chain activity we're going to talk about. The purpose of the design and transition value chain activity is to ensure that the products and services are continually meeting the stakeholder expectations for quality, cost, and time to market. This is where we're going to make sure that we're figuring out how this product is actually going to be built. This is where we come up with all the designs for it and then plan how we're going to move it from an idea to actually being built and put out into the marketplace. There's lots of different inputs into the design and transition phase. When we start talking about design and transition, we have to take in things like portfolio decisions that come out of the planning area. We also want to make sure we understand the architectures and the policies that plans has created. We're going to take things from the engagement area as well, things like product and service requirements that Engage has gotten from the customers and the consumers and other areas. We also want to make sure that we're taking into account the improvement initiatives and the plans that come out of the Improve process. We're also going to be looking at all of those improvement status reports that came from Improve so we can figure out how do we design things better next time. We're also going to take a look at all of our service performance information that comes out of our deliver and support and improve processes. Are we meeting the service targets that have been set? Have we transitioned something successfully? All of these things are things we need to consider as we're designing and transitioning our services to take them from an idea and from a plan all the way out into a real usable thing that is going to be delivered to a consumer to use. All of this happens inside of this design and transition area. Now, as we start looking at this, we're also going to take in some things that come from the obtain and build process. Things like what service components are available. Obtain and build already has a lot of things that have been built. Maybe as we're designing a new service, we can reuse some of the things that already exist and use them in our new service. And finally, we have to consider the knowledge and information. Now, knowledge and information is going to come from two different places. First, we have knowledge and information about third-party service components from Engage. This is where we're going to be considering, just like we did for Obtain and Build, what things are available to use. but now we're doing it from a third-party partner or a supplier perspective. If we know that our supplier has this type of capability, then we can help better design and transition something that works around that capability. The other part of knowledge and information is the knowledge and information about new and changed products and services. This is what we're going to get from our obtain and build. As we have built and obtained things, we're going to get the product specifications, the known errors, and other information. And all of that can serve as an input into this design and transition activity. Now, as far as outputs from this activity, we're going to be looking at getting things like the requirements and the specifications and passing those over to the obtain and build. So as I've designed this brand new service that's going to do voucher fulfillment for my students, I need to come up with what the requirements and specifications are and pass that to the people who are actually going to buy the servers and buy the integrations and buy the automation software that's going to allow that to occur inside of obtain and build. Also, if we need to contract something, we're going to go and pass that over to Engage. We need to give them the contract and the agreement requirements that we need for service level agreements, service management agreements, and different contracts for supplies and partners, and send that through Engage out to those external entities. Another output is any new and changed products and services that we're going to get from the design and transition, and we're going to pass those and transition those over to deliver and support. Another thing when we start talking about knowledge and information, when we get knowledge and information about new and changed products or services, we're going to pass that not just to obtain and build, but to all of the different parts of the value chain activities, because plans needs to know about it so they can figure out what version 2 and 3 and 4 is going to look like. We need to pass that over to design and transition ourselves as we design the next version. We need to pass that over to obtain and build so they can build the things as you design them. You need to pass it over to deliver and support so they know how to support it when it breaks. All the value chain activities need that knowledge and information about new or changed products. And finally, we want to make sure we're getting performance information and improvement opportunities out of the design and transition and back over to improve. As we go through and we design and build something, we're going to find out that, hey, when we tried to design X system, we had problems 1, 2, and 3. We'll pass that over to improve so they can come up with ways for us to improve our processes and make it more efficient. So when we look at this at the end of the day, when we start talking about design and transition as an activity, think about taking some idea from plans, making it into what will be built in obtain and build. That's kind of the main focus. But there's all these other inputs and outputs for this activity because those are things that are going to happen in a non-sequential manner because things are happening all the times in rapid development when we're dealing with IT services. Our next value chain activity is obtain, build. Now, the purpose of the obtain, build value chain activity is to ensure that service components are available when and where they're needed, and they're going to meet the agreed upon specifications. Simply put, if I'm going to build a service, I need to build it to the design criteria that I was given from the design and transition activity. Now, there are a lot of different inputs and outputs when it comes to obtain, build. When we talk about inputs, we're going to get them from a variety of sources. First, let's think about architectures and policies. We've talked a lot about this, and this is something that comes from plans. Plans is going to output the architectures and policies, and lots of these different value chains are going to use those. Because if we know what the governance is and the architecture and the policies for our organization, that helps us design and transition a better service, or in this case, obtain and build it to those proper specifications. Next, we're going to look at contracts and agreements. As we get contracts and agreements with external and internal suppliers and partners, those are all going to come as an input from Engage into this obtain build. Next, we're also going to look at goods and services. And these goods and services are going to be provided by these external and internal suppliers and partners. Again, once we contract for something, we then are going to get some kind of good or service for it. The information, the interaction, and the engagement all comes from the Engage portion of that contract. But the actual physical delivery and receipt of the components, the goods, and the services, that occurs inside the obtain build part of this activity. And that is going to bring us to our next thing, which is getting the requirements and specifications for what we want to obtain or build. Where do we get the requirements and specifications from? Well, that comes from design and transition. Somebody has designed this service and they pass those designs to us here in the obtain build, where we're actually going to install the software, purchase the servers, get it all connected and networked, and then transition it into the real live environment when it goes back into design and transition. Another input to the obtain and build activity is improvement initiatives and plans, and these are going to come from the improve activity, because the improve activity has been looking at how can we make things better. Once they figure out those processes and procedures of how we can improve things, they're going to pass that back to obtain build so they can build those things. Another thing we're going to get from improve is our improvement status reports. Again, they're going to be looking at our processes, our procedures, the lessons learned from before, and help us improve the way we do business. Now, going back to our engage activity, we're going to get something from them as well. We're going to get changes and project initiation requests from engage, because as a customer or a consumer or an end user, if I have a problem with a service, I might put in a change request. And if I put in that change request, it's coming in through Engage because it's an external communication. Once Engage gets that request, they're going to process it and then pass it over to us in Obtain Build so that we can obtain or build the new service to meet that customer need. Other change requests may also be provided from Deliver and Support because the people who are delivering and supporting things, maybe there was a switch that went down. Well, Deliver and Support can put a change request that says switch number 1 needs to be replaced. And then here in Obtain Build, we would go get a new switch and replace switch number 1. Again, these processes are all very interrelated. And then we get down to our knowledge and information. Again, the same two we've been talking about a lot already. Knowledge and information about new or changed product and services is going to come from design and transition. We need to know what design and transition is going to do for some new service so that we can then build to that specification. And the other thing with knowledge and information is anything that comes from a third-party service component. That information is going to come from Engage as well, because Engage is going to push that out and get it from our third-party suppliers. Now that we know all of the inputs, let's talk about some of the outputs. One of the outputs is service components for delivery and support. As I go and I build a service, I'm going to build different components for it. I might build some software code or a particular server or a particular system. Once I do and it goes into live operation, it's no longer my problem as Obtain Build. It now gets transitioned over to Deliver and Support, who's going to run it on a daily basis to give the end user what they need. This can include things like spare parts, consumables, new functionality, systems, and software. All of this stuff is stuff that we can go and give to Deliver and Support. Generally, when it's something big like a new system or new function, it's going to go from Obtain Build back to transition and from transition to Deliver and Support. But if it's something small like a spare part or a consumable, then it doesn't need to go to design and transition again, and instead it'll go straight to Deliver and Support. Let's say, for example, that I built a brand new web service and we want to get it out into the live environment. Well, we built it here in Obtain Build based on the designs that we got from design and transition. Now that we've built it though, we're going to turn that back over to design and transition so that they can transition that into the live environment. And from them, it's going to go back over into the delivery and support. You can see how all these processes and activities are going to tie together. Another output from this activity is knowledge and information about our new and changed service components to all of the other value chain activities. Anytime I built something new, I need to tell everybody about it so they know the functionality, the capabilities, how long that thing will last, when it needs to be replaced or repaired, and we can plan for it, we can design for it, we can support it. All of the other activities are going to rely on this knowledge and information, and that's why having a good knowledge management process is really important. Now, when we go back to contracts and agreements, we're going to send all that information and the requirements we have for those back to Engage, who's going to engage with those external stakeholders, those partners, and those suppliers. And finally, we're going to get all of the information about our own activity here inside of the Obtain and Build, and we're going to collect that performance information and improvement opportunities and pass that over to the Improve activity. That way they can consolidate that and look holistically across all of the activities and figure out how we can best improve ourselves. So when it comes down to it and we talk about the value chain activity of Obtain and Build, I want you to think about it pretty simply like this. Anytime we're going to buy something and install it, that's going to be part of this Obtain Build. If we're coding something and we're creating a new service, that's going to be inside Obtain Build. It's when the thing is actually being built and developed and coded based on the requirements you got from design and transition. Once it's ready, you're going to turn that back over either to design and transition to formally transition it to delivery and support, or in the case of something minor like a replacement switch or replacement hardware, that might go directly to deliver and support, which we're going to talk about next. The third value chain activity inside the center of the value chain is deliver and support. This is where a lot of us work if we work in the IT world. If you happen to work in IT support, you probably work inside of deliver and support. The purpose of deliver and support as a value chain activity is to ensure that the services are delivered and supported according to the agreed specifications and stakeholder expectations. I like to think about this as service operation. We want to make sure the end user is getting the service and support that they need, and that's why we call it deliver and support. I'm going to deliver some sort of capability and support that end user. When you're watching one of my videos, you're using the deliver and support process. We are delivering that video to you, and if you have a problem, we support you. That's part of that particular service. Now, as we design the next video, that would go back to design and transition. As we're trying to film and edit that next video, that's obtain and build. But once we have it ready and you're ready to consume it, that becomes deliver and support. And the same thing works inside our IT services. If I'm building a new email server, that's an obtain build. Once it's out and you're using that email server, we're now in deliver and support. So what are some of the inputs inside of deliver and support? The first one is any new and changed products and services that are provided by design and transition. Remember, obtain build is going to build it, pass it back to transition, and then transition is going to make sure it gets smoothly put into the marketplace so that deliver and support can then run it from there. We're also going to have our contracts and our agreements with external and internal suppliers and partners provided to us from Engage. As Engage does all the external engagements, we're then going to use those contracts to get the things we need inside of deliver and support. We also are going to get service components provided to us by obtain and build. As they built that new email server, it's going to be transitioned, and eventually we are going to get it here in deliver and support. Then we're going to get things like improvement initiatives and plans that are going to come out of the improve process or our value chain activity. We're also going to get improvement status reports from the improve value chain activity. We're going to get user support tasks from Engage, because anytime we're talking to a user, that's an engagement function. And we're also going to be looking at the knowledge and information. The knowledge and information about our new and changed service components and services from design and transition or obtain and build, or the knowledge and information about third-party service components from our Engage partnerships. All of that is the way we're going to get things into this value chain activity. Now, on the other side, we're going to output a lot of things. And we're going to output things like the services that we're delivering to our customers and users. This is the thing that you're actually using. When you go to the website, you're in the deliver and support because you're taking advantage of the delivery. You're also going to get the outputs of information on the completion of user support tasks for Engage. So if you have a problem and you submitted a support ticket, at some point you're going to get a result coming back to you through the Engage process that says your ticket has been solved and here was the resolution. Another thing you're going to get is product and service performance information that comes out of Engage and Improve as those value chain activities. All of this needs to get back out to that end user. We're also going to output things like improvement opportunities. And as we figure out, hey, the way we're delivering our videos isn't the best, maybe we should do it this other way, we would give that improvement recommendation and opportunity over to Improve, which then can consolidate that, prioritize that, and figure out how we're going to better ourselves for the long term. When we talk about improvements for contracts and agreement requirements, that's going to go into the Engage value chain activity. And if we look at all the different change requests, any of those that come in as part of delivery and support, we're going to output those over to obtain and build so that they can obtain or build the thing and change it to the way we need. All of this are things, as you can see, that interlock together. They're all very much going in and out all of the time. And the last output we have for the deliver and support activity is the service performance information. We're going to collect a lot of information about our services. Maybe we're running servers and we're finding out how much space is left on a shared drive, or the uptime, or the availability, or the capacity, or the throughput. All of that is service performance information. And as we collect all of that, we're going to process it and then pass it back over to the design and transition phase. Why would we give it to design and transition? Well, because they're constantly looking at what capacity you have and do you need more. For example, if we had one single web server and we started seeing that the trend was that we were using 80 or 90 or 95% capacity, we want to make sure we're designing version 2 of that web server with additional capacity. Maybe that's moving to a cloud architecture. Maybe that's moving to a multi-site homed environment or using a content distribution network. Whatever that is, it has to be designed. And so by feeding this service performance information back to design and transition, they can help us design what the next version of our service is going to look like. Value streams. So we've talked a lot about the different activities inside the service value chain. And you saw where there was a lot of overlap and coordination where one activity fed into another. And then that took that input and created another output that went to a different value chain activity. So there's a lot of interconnections here. Whenever we're trying to carry out a certain task or respond to a particular situation, we create what's known as a service value stream. This service value stream is a specific combination of activities and practices, and each one is designed for a particular scenario. So I might have something that takes 5 steps to complete. It might start in the engage activity and do 3 steps there, and then move on to the deliver and support activity, where 2 more steps are conducted. Now, there may be a different scenario and a different activity where we get it from the engage, and there's only 2 steps in the engage activity, and then it passes it over to deliver and support, where there's 2 other steps. As you can see, we can break these things up in any way we want, and we can pass information from one to the other. As each value stream is made up of different combinations of value chain activities and practices, we're going to make sure that we understand what the input and the output is, because understanding what the input and output is specific to each particular value stream. For the 2 streams I show here, where you have stream A and stream B, they're going to go through a different set of processes and steps internal to each of those activities. And that's going to create a different output based on the input it gets. This is the idea of how we put all of these things together and create all of these different value streams, which are basically going to be different procedures or processes as they take whatever the input is, do a bunch of things to add value, and output value on the other side. That's the whole idea here, and that's why the service value chain is so important. It's because of all of these interrelations that occur as we move through the process and add more value. Continual improvement. So we've spent a lot of time going through each of the pieces of the service value system. In the last section, we covered the middle block, which was the service value chain. Now we're going to move to the lowest block, which is continual improvement. You'll notice here that it is called out in this purple block. Now, right above continual improvement, there's a block called practices. And practices are going to be the 34 distinct idle practices that we're going to cover throughout the course. And oddly enough, continual improvement is one of those 34. So why is continual improvement pulled out in the diagram as its own activity shown here in addition to the fact that it's a practice? Well, it's because continual improvement is that important. In everything we do, we should always be trying to improve. And when we look at this from the exam perspective, continual improvement comes up twice. First, you have to be able to recall the purpose of the continual improvement practice. Notice the key word there is recall. That means you have to be able to know it word for word and be able to identify that definition on the exam. Second, you also need to be able to explain or discuss how continual improvement and the continual improvement model fits within the service value chain and the service value system. So we're going to spend this section on the course talking specifically about continual improvement. Now, I said you have to be able to recall the definition. So what is that definition? Well, the purpose of the continual improvement practice is to align the organization's practices and services with changing business needs through the ongoing identification and improvement of services, service components, practices, or elements that are involved in the efficient and effective management of products and services. So this is a very long definition, but you need to be able to know it, because if they give you something where there's a fill in the blank, you have to pull in the right word. If they give you this definition, you need to be able to identify that it is the continual improvement practice. That's the level of knowledge you need for the recall part of the exam. Now, as we go through the rest of this section, I'm going to present to you the continual improvement model, how it fits into the service value chain, and walk you through each step of that continual improvement model so you can understand it and explain it on the exam. The continual improvement model. Now, the continual improvement model is a 7-step methodology that provides us a framework of how we should do improvement operations within our organizations. Now, what we're going to do in this lesson is focus on what those 7 steps are, and then we're going to spend time on each one of them individually in their own lesson following this one. So, what is this model? Well, it all starts out with step number 1. What is the vision? Then we move into step 2. Where are we now? Step 3. Where do we want to be? Step 4. How do we get there? Step 5. Take action. Step 6. Did we get there? Step 7. How do we keep this momentum going? And then we restart it all again, because continual improvement is an ongoing process that never stops. We're going to continually go time and time again until we get the best product we ever can have. And guess what? We're never going to reach perfection. There's always new features. There's always better ways of doing something. And so by doing this continual improvement, we're constantly trying to get better and better and better to get to that ultimate vision, that nirvana, if you will, but we're never quite going to reach it. We'll talk about that more in the next lesson when we discuss what is the vision. But for the exam, I wanted to give you just this quick video to go through these 7 steps. Why is that? Because on the exam, you're going to get questions about this. They might describe one of these 7 steps, and you're going to have to pick which of the 7 steps it is. They might say, what comes next after where do we want to be? And you're going to have to say, how do we get there? You need to know these 7 steps. This is a memorization item for the exam. But beyond memorizing them, you need to understand what these 7 steps are. And that's why we're going to spend time in the next 7 lessons going through each one individually. What is the vision? Each improvement initiative should support the organization's goals and objectives. The first step of the continual improvement model is to define the vision of the initiative. What exactly are we trying to accomplish? This is going to provide the context for all of our subsequent decisions and links all of our individual actions to the organization's vision for the future. This vision is going to come from your top leadership. It should come from the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, or others who have this executive vision of where we're trying to go with the organization. This step of the continual improvement model focuses on 2 key areas. First, the organization's vision and objectives that need to be translated for specific business units, departments, teams, and individuals. So we take this context and we take it from the larger organization and drill it down into our specific cases that we're doing our improvement initiative inside. If we don't do that, it can be really difficult for us to know how we're going towards the right way. The second thing is you need to have a high-level vision for the planned improvement, and this has to be created. Somebody has to write it and someone has to agree to it. Normally, this will be your department head or upper leadership if it's going to be an organization-wide improvement initiative. Now, you may be wondering, why is this step of determining your vision so important? Well, if we neglect to do this, we may see some incremental improvements in some areas or some teams, but we're not going to see a holistic improvement across the organization as a whole. If you want big improvements, you need to have a big vision. Now, the other problem is that sometimes these improvements that we're working on don't actually help to advance the overall vision of the company. Instead, we might be spending time and money and resources and energy working on some non-value-adding activities, all because we didn't know what the true vision was. And all of those resources, they could have been invested much better in other improvements if only we knew what the vision was. So by the time you're done with the what is the vision step of the model, you should ensure that you know what the high-level direction is and that it's fully understood. You need to make sure that you also have the planned improvement initiatives described and understand the context of them inside your organization. Additionally, all of your stakeholders need to be identified and their roles have to be well understood. The role of the person or the team that's responsible for carrying out this improvement is also now going to be clear to you, and you're going to understand their role in relation to achieving the overall organization's vision. And the expected value from this vision should also be agreed upon. That way, we all know what we're getting into. Basically, by understanding your vision, we now know what direction we should be moving towards with all of our improvements, who we're going to be helping with it, and who's going to help us, and how it's going to affect the organization as a whole. Where are we now? The success of an improvement initiative depends on a clear and accurate understanding of the starting point and the impact of your initiative. Now, if you think of an improvement as a journey going from point A to point B, this step clearly defines what point A looks like. Think about it like this. If I asked you to drive to my office right now, you'd first need to know two things. First, you need to know where my office is, and I'm located in the Washington, D.C. area. And second, you need to know where you're currently located. If you're in California, you're going to need to get in your car and drive east to reach my office. But if you're sitting in London, England, you're going to need to charter a boat or get on a plane and then start heading west. Depending on where you're coming from is going to dictate where you're going to and how you're going to get there. Your journey simply can't be mapped out if you don't know what your starting point is. Now, in relation to our IT services, we need to understand the current state of our services and our products. To do that, we're going to conduct a current state assessment of the existing services by determining what the user's perception of the value is for our services, what existing skills and competencies our workforce has for our services, and what processes and procedures are involved in delivering those services. We may even look at what the technical capabilities are of our current servers, our networks, and other solutions. If you're looking at your organization's ability to deliver the services, you're also going to look at your organization's culture and the prevailing attitudes of the employees. Now, as we do all of this, we're going to be conducting this assessment to determine the current state using objective measurements whenever we can. Now, an objective measurement is something we can actually measure. It's not just, do I feel good about this or bad about this? We're going to try to put numbers to it. These measurements are going to be used to create a baseline, and this baseline can be used in later steps of the process to compare our progress against our current baseline or current state. Now, remember, it's difficult to track and measure any effectiveness of your improvement initiatives if you never determined where you started from. Make sure you take the time to create a good objective baseline before you move into the next step of the continual improvement model. Where do we want to be? Coming out of step 2, we now know where we are in terms of our baseline. This now begs the question, where do we want to be? Let's pretend that you're back in college again. When you started the school year, you had a vision. This is step 1. And your vision was you're going to earn a 3.5 grade point average. Now, you just finished your first semester and you got your grades back. Unfortunately, you didn't do as well as you thought, and you earned some B's and some C's. Now you're looking at your grade point average and you see that you earned a 2.9. That's the second step. Where are we now? We're at a 2.9. Now, you need to decide if this semester is going to be different. And if you've made that decision, we're going to go ahead and try to do some improvement initiatives. You might study longer or study differently. Now, you've decided that by the end of this school year, you want to have a 3.3 GPA. And by the end of next school year, you want to achieve an initial vision of 3.5. This is what we're going to be doing in step 3. We're going to decide where we want to be, both in the short term and the long term. During this step, we're going to perform a gap analysis. This is going to look at our overall vision, where we currently are, and where we want to be over some amount of time. Based on this analysis, we're going to be able to determine what that delta is, what the gap is. So for example, if I said I wanted to have $1,000 in my bank account, but I only have $100 today, well, the gap is $900. $1,000, where I want to be, versus the $100 I currently have. Therefore, we need to figure out a way of what we're going to do to get us $900 more. Now, in the case of our IT systems, it's usually not going to be monetary related. It'll be based on some key metrics though. This is going to be based on things like critical success factors, or CSFs, or key performance indicators, KPIs. Either way, in the business world, we refer to these generally as metrics. These metrics are what we're going to use to measure things and figure out what the gap is. Now, it's important to note here that our vision from step 1 may be something that is totally aspirational and never going to be obtained truly. The reason for this is because sometimes our vision is going to be beyond what we can ever get to. Let's use the example of our college GPA again. Let's say your vision was to graduate college with a perfect score, a 4.0 GPA. Well, based on our current state that we found in step 2, we're never going to be able to reach that 4.0 because we already earned some B's and some C's, which is going to lower our overall average. Now that's fine, we can keep the vision of graduating with a 4.0, but we know we're never going to reach it. Maybe we can get up to a 3.8, but we'll never get to 4.0. It's just the way math works, right? So now, here in step 3, we're going to create smaller goals that we can reach as we try to get closer and closer to the actual vision, whether or not we ever obtain that actual vision in the end. So now in step 3, we're going to figure out where do we want to be, and we're going to set our goals. We're going to agree to those key performance indicators, those metrics, such as the KPIs and the critical success factors. But at this point, we still haven't taken any actions to actually improve, right? We've just set out our goals, but that's okay, because next, in step 4, we're going to begin to formulate our plan in order to start taking some action. How do we get there? It's finally time to plan for some changes. Up to this point, we've agreed upon the vision, we've created our baseline to determine what the current state actually looks like, and then we determine what the proper goals and metrics are for us to aim for. Now, we want to ask the 4th question, known as step 4, how do we get there? So in step 4, we're going to create a plan. This plan may be straightforward and direct and provide us the quickest route to completing a single simple improvement. Or it could be more complex, more involved, and made up of a series of twisting roads or starts and stops. The most effective approach to executing the improvement may not be clear at the beginning of our planning efforts. You may not know what right looks like. And so if this is the case, sometimes it may be necessary to design experiments that are going to test which options have the most potential so you can figure out which path to go down. Either way, we want to plan for how we're going to go and get to the desired set of goals that we set out for ourselves. And we're going to break the improvement initiative down into workable chunks or units. After each portion is complete, we're going to reassess where we are and if that planned set of actions is getting us closer to our actual goals. If you don't have a plan, remember, you're planning to fail. There's nothing worse than an improvement initiative that flounders and fails simply because no one ever created a plan of action for the organization to follow. Be a leader, determine how we're going to get there, and then we can move into step 5 and finally take some action. It's finally time to take some action. We have our vision, we have our baseline, we have our goals, and we have our plan. Now in step 5, we're going to take action and put those plans into motion. When you're taking action, you can do this under a traditional waterfall approach where a large improvement initiative is broken down into phases, a lot of planning and preparation is performed, and then a large sweeping change occurs over a very short period of time and you transition to the new system. This may work when you need to take a really old system, for example, and completely replace it. But most of the time, you're probably going to take action in smaller iterations using a much more agile methodology. In this case, you're going to deliver smaller product and service improvements, but you're going to do them much more frequently, creating incremental but smaller wins and value. Either method will work, and it really depends on your situation on which one you're going to use. During this effort, there needs to be a continual focus on measuring your progress towards the vision, managing your risks during those changes, and ensuring visibility and awareness of the initiative is spread throughout the organization so everybody knows what's going on. Once the improvement initiative is complete, we then can move on to step 6 and find out if we were successful or not. Did we get there? We've come a long way in our improvement journey. For us, it may have been 10 or 20 minutes of video, but in real life, we may have just spent 3 to 6 months to create and implement the improvement we wanted to see. Now it's time to check in on our progress and see if we made a positive or a negative change. The 6th step, did we get there, involves checking our new normal. Basically, where are we today, and comparing it against the original baseline from step 2 that we took at the beginning of the process. Too often, once an improvement plan is set into motion, people just start to assume that the expected benefits are going to be achieved. They run off and they start on the next initiative, and they stop measuring or worrying about the current one you're working on. In the real world, though, the journey to reaching an improved state is usually found among a pathway lined with a lot of obstacles. Success is simply not guaranteed. It must be measured and it must be validated. So, in step 6, we're going to take another measurement, just like we did back in step 2. We're going to use the exact same processes, and then we're going to compare those two measurements. Let's go back and use our college GPA example. We wanted to reach a 3.3 GPA by the end of the semester. If we just looked at your report card and we saw you earned a 3.4, then we did it. You improved your score and took it up above a 3.3. That's great. Now, on the other hand, if you earned a 3.2, we missed the mark. Based on our new measurements, we now have a new baseline and we can determine what we need to do next. This is where we pick up in the next lesson, the 7th and final step. Our 7th and final step is to determine how do we keep the momentum going. We probably just spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of working hours trying to improve something in the organization. If we met the goal, we don't want to necessarily stop though, but we want to keep improving, right? Because we always want to get better. And if we didn't meet our goal, then we need to go back and readjust and figure out how we can improve to meet our goals. If this happened, we might return to an earlier step, create a new goal, or create a new plan and then try again. But let's think positively for a few minutes here. Let's assume that we met our goals that we set out in step 3 with our key performance indicators and our critical success factors. Things are going great, we improved, and everyone is happy. Well, if we don't do something, oftentimes people are going to revert to their old ways of doing business. For example, maybe our customer service satisfaction scores weren't very good, and so we set forth on an improvement initiative, and we raised the scores by 50%, and things are going really well. So we decided to shift our focus to a new initiative, and now guess what? Since nobody's closely monitoring the customer support metrics anymore, the call center agents stop trying as hard, and the satisfaction scores start going down again. Now, this is the opposite of what we want. Or maybe, whenever the initiative that you did works so well within one department, we decided we want to keep the momentum going by instituting that change across multiple departments by issuing a new company policy. Either way, we want to make sure the improvement gains keep going forward and we keep up with the progress we're making. This is what Step 7 is all about. It's about creating and implementing a plan to keep that positive momentum moving forward and keeping us to get more improvements down the road. And then you're going to notice in the diagram that we return to the top of the model once more. Why is this? Well, this is because we always want to be improving. This is our goal, constant and continual improvement. This model is cyclical in nature. We continue to go round and round and round again, gaining more efficiencies, more effectiveness, and more value as we go along. That's the whole goal here inside the continual improvement model. We want to keep improving always. Continual improvement and the guiding principles. In this lesson, I want to briefly discuss how we can tie the idea of the continual improvement model back to our guiding principles. You may have thought to yourself while I was covering those different steps, hey, wouldn't the insert the name of your guiding principle here be very useful during this step? And guess what? You would be right. All of the principles are applicable and relevant at nearly every step of the improvement initiative. However, some of our guiding principles are especially relevant to certain steps. So we're going to go through the 7 steps again really quickly one more time. But this time, we're going to link them back to our useful guiding principles for each step, and we're going to figure out which ones are the most useful. First, we have what is the vision. When we're thinking about the vision, we want to have a focus on value. We want to think about collaborating and promoting visibility so we can share that vision across the organization. And we want to think and work holistically because we want to create a vision that works for the entire organization, not just for a single department. Our second step, where are we now? That's going to start with where we are. So going back to the principle of start where you are is a great place. Also, we want to collaborate and promote visibility. We want everyone to know exactly where we are and how we're performing. Third, we want to go to where do we want to be. This is where we're going to progress iteratively with feedback. We're going to start setting out goals and start some things into motion. We also want to think and work holistically so we can think about how it's going to affect the entire organization. We also want to think about keeping it simple and practical. When I start figuring out how I'm going to do metrics and measures, I don't want to have it very complicated. I want something that's simple, practical, and easy to measure. And then I also want to think about optimizing and automation because I don't want to have to go and check all the server spaces manually. I want to figure out the capacity metric automated, and I want to do that through an optimized method. So these are going to be the 4 that are most important to us. In our 4th step, how do we get there? We're starting to plan, right? Well, when we plan, we want to plan to progress iteratively and with feedback. We also want to make sure we're collaborating and promoting visibility of that plan to everybody else. We want to think and work holistically, so our plan is going to affect everyone in the organization properly, and we want to keep our plan simple and practical. Our 5th step is where we take action. When we take action, we're focusing on value. What actions can we do to get us the most value the quickest? We also want to progress iteratively and with feedback, incorporating that feedback as we go and taking positive action and continually move forward. And then we want to collaborate and promote visibility. We want to make sure everybody knows what actions we're taking and why we're doing it. Next, we're going to move into the 6th step, which is did we get there? When we're thinking about did we get there, we're again going to have a focus on value. We're going to collaborate and promote the visibility of the results so people know, yes, we did it, it worked, or uh-oh, it didn't, we need to try harder. And we want to think and work holistically, again, across the entire organization. That brings us to our 7th and final step. How do we keep the momentum going? Well, we're going to focus on value. We're going to collaborate and promote visibility, sharing the message with everybody else. We're going to think and work holistically across the organization. And now that we've got something that's working, we want to optimize it. And once we optimize it, we want to automate it. So optimize and automate would be our last guiding principle. So as you can see, by using the continual improvement along with the guiding principles, you can create a solid framework for successful service management. These concept models work exceptionally well with agile methodologies, especially with that progress and iterative feedback, and we also can use it for DevOps or development operations and lean frameworks as well. It really does work well, and it is an excellent tool to put in your toolbox as you move forward into the real world. Categories of practices. Over the next 3 sections of the course, we're going to cover all 34 of the Itil 4 practices. These 34 individual practices are divided up into 3 categories: general management practices, service management practices, and technical management practices. This begs the question though, what exactly is a practice? You may remember from our service value system lesson that there was a portion of the diagram that called out these practices. Well, a practice is a set of organized resources designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. Each practice is going to support multiple service value chain activities, and it includes resources based on the 4 dimensions of IT service management. So in this section of the course, we're going to focus on the first 14 practices of Itil 4. These are known as the general management practices. But before we dive into those general management practices, let me cover what you need to know for the exam, because we're going to cover a lot of information during the next 3 sections of the course. First, you need to be able to recall the purpose of 15 of the Itil practices. I'm not going to list each of those 15 right now, but instead, as we cover each practice in its own video, I'm going to tell you whether you need to recall it for the exam or not. For these 15 practices, though, you need to remember the definition, since these are at the recall level of knowledge for the exam. Just as a reminder, there are 34 practices inside of Itil 4, and while I'm going to cover each of these at least briefly, this is going to help you get a general awareness of each of the 34 of them. You only really need to know 15 of them for the foundation level of the exam. And of these 15, there are 6 of them that you have to know more in depth. Again, when I cover those specific practices, I'm going to remind you that these are very important and you're going to have to pay more attention than just knowing the definition. In fact, as we start each of these sections covering the different categories of practices, we're going to first cover the practices that you have to know in depth. Then we're going to cover the practices that you simply need to recall the definition for. And then we're going to finish out each section with the practices that aren't covered by the foundation exam and instead are being covered just for your general awareness. As we go through these 3 sections of the course, we're also going to cover the 7 terms that are under the recall level of knowledge for the exam, and we're going to do this throughout our discussion of these practices. These are the IT asset, event, configuration item, change, incident, problem, and known error. When we get to them in the lessons, I'm going to remind you again that these are the terms that you have to memorize the definitions for. So, with all of that said, let's dive into the general management practices. In this section of the course, we're going to cover the general management practices. This is the first of 3 categories of Itil practices. Inside this category, we're going to cover 14 of the 34 Itil practices. First, we're going to talk about continual improvement, and this is one that you have to know in depth. Then we're going to talk about information security management, relationship management, and supplier management. These 3 are at the recall level of knowledge, so you need to memorize their definition. And then we're going to cover all of the other 10 inside this category, and these are just going to be for a general awareness. You don't need to know them for the exam. This includes architecture management, knowledge management, measurement and reporting, organizational change management, portfolio management, project management, risk management, service financial management, strategy management, and workforce and talent management. Now, all of these general management principles have been adopted and adapted for service management from more general business management domains. For example, project management and portfolio management are not something that only occur inside the IT world, We use these across all business organizations, and that's why these are considered general business management domains, and that's why we're going to cover them here in the category of general management practices. Continual improvement. Our first general management practice is continual improvement, and for the exam, this is the one you need to know in depth from this section. For this one, you need to be able to explain continual improvement, what its purpose is, and how it applies throughout the value chain. So when we talk about continual improvement, what exactly is its purpose? Well, the purpose of the continual improvement practice is to align the organization's practices and services with changing business needs through the ongoing identification and improvement of services, service components, practices, or any other element involved in the efficient and effective management of products and services. Basically, how do we make things work better? That's what continual improvement is all about. Now, when we think about continual improvement, there's a couple of key things that it focuses on. First, we want to encourage continual improvement across the organization. We always want to be aiming for something bigger, better, faster, cheaper, or more efficient. The second key function of continual improvement is to secure time and budget for continual improvement. It's really easy in an organization to keep working on the same things day in and day out and not think about how to improve. You want to make sure you're securing that time and budget so we can continue to work on improving our processes. Next, we want to think about identifying and logging improvement opportunities. Anytime you're working on something, you might have an idea and say, this would be better if we did X thing. At that point, we want to log that down, identify it, and that way, eventually, we might be able to get back to it and cause that improvement to happen. Another thing we want to think about is how we assess and prioritize our improvement opportunities. You may have 100 great ideas, but which one should we work on first? That's part of continual improvement. We also want to think about how we're going to make a business case for those improvement actions. At some point, you need to get budget for your improvement, right? So you're going to have to think about how we're going to be able to do that and make the case for it up to your senior leadership or your senior management. Maybe you're going to say something like, hey boss, I think we should do this improvement action. It's going to take us 20 hours right now to build it, but it's going to save us 10 hours a week. So in just 2 weeks, we're going to make up that time. It's a great idea. That would be an example of making your business case. Next, we want to think about how we're going to plan and implement those improvements, and we want to figure out how we're going to measure and evaluate the improvements and the results of those improvements. Again, we've talked a lot about this when we talked about the continual improvement model in the last section of the course. This is just the formal practice that is going to work that model. And we also want to make sure we're coordinating our improvement activities across the organization. Remember, we want to think holistically and act widely across the organization for the best improvements. Now, when we're working with continual improvement, there's a lot of different tools that we can put into our toolbox. These are things like methods and models and techniques. This is things like lean methods where we're trying to reduce waste, multi-phase projects where we're trying to organize the way we're going to do things and get incremental improvements. We might do maturity assessments to figure out how mature our organization is and are we operating at peak efficiency. We might be using development ops so that we can develop things quicker and faster and get them into market. We might use something like a balanced scorecard where we look at the improvement and we look at it through the lens of those 4 different dimensions of service management. We also might be using agile improvements and techniques. We might be trying to get some quick wins, or we might even do a SWOT analysis. And a SWOT analysis is something that they teach in business school. It's where you list out the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, and then you figure out how that applies to your given initiative. Now, all of this is great, and there's one more technique or tool that you should be using, and it's called a continual improvement register. Now, a continual improvement register, or CIR, is a database or a structured document that we use to track and manage all of the improvement ideas from the identification through final action. So as I said before, you might be sitting there and you come up with a great idea. Well, if you just think about it and nothing gets done, we're never going to improve. So instead, you should submit that idea into the CIR, the Continual Improvement Register. From there, we'll log it in there, and eventually we're going to figure out whether or not we're going to work on that improvement idea, and if that improvement has a low, medium, or high impact, and what the resolution is. Did we decide to do it, or did we not decide to do it? And if we decide to do it, when are we going to decide to do it, and how are we going to plan for it? So that's the whole idea. Here's an example of a CIR. Here you can see that there are 3 different things that are listed, and the impact for each one, medium, medium, and high. And then the last column there would be where we said what we're going to do with it. Yes, we're going to do this initiative, and we're going to start it in Q1 of next year. Whatever the plan is, we want to make sure we're capturing it. The last thing I want to talk about in continual improvement is how it's operated when you talk about continual improvement with the relationships involved. we like to put this in as a pyramid. So if we start at the bottom and we start thinking about our partners and suppliers, how can we improve our relationships with partners and suppliers? Well, we can do that by going through and looking at our contracts and including how we're going to measure, report, and improve those processes. Then we look inside our entire organization, which is the next large audience that we have. And from there, we want to try to get active participation in continual improvement initiatives as a core part of everyone's job. When it comes down to it, continual improvement isn't the job of the continual improvement manager. It's the job of everyone in the organization. And then we have the continual improvement team led by the continual improvement manager. Their job is to lead the efforts and advocate for the practice across the entire organization. They're the ones trying to get everyone else in the organization to join in the fight and help us improve. And then all the way at the top of the pyramid, we have those few leaders at the top. And those are going to be the ones who are going to try to embed continual improvement into the way that people think and work by providing that proper vision. And so this really does hark back to that continual improvement model we talked about. If we look at this pyramid and we do it from the top to the bottom instead, we start seeing the leaders who come up with the vision, right? Which is the beginning of our continual improvement model. Then we have our continual improvement team. And that team is the ones who are going to be doing the baseline assessments of where we are and determining where we want to be. They're also going to help develop the plans. But then when we want to take action, we have to do that with everyone in the organization, including our partners and suppliers outside the organization. And then we're going to reassess where we are and then figure out how do we keep this momentum going and do it all again. You can see how this all ties in together time and time again. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here in continual improvement is how it integrates with the different value chain activities. So if we look at how continual improvement is going to work inside plan, the continual improvement practice is applied to all planning activities. We're going to look at the methods and techniques to make sure that they're all relevant for the organization's current objective and the context in which we're operating. When we start looking at this from the improve perspective, the continual improvement practice is key to this value chain activity. It's all about improvement. It structures our resources and our activities to enable that improvement at all levels of the organization and across the service value system. Now, as we look at the rest of the service value chain, and we look at the value chain activities of engage, design and transition, obtain and build, and deliver and support, each of these value chain activities are subject to continual improvement because we're always trying to improve our practices, our activities, and our processes. And the continual improvement practice itself is applied to all of these. As you can see, the continual improvement practice is inside everything we do inside Itil 4. We're always trying to continue to improve. If we go back and look at the service value chain again, you see that improve touches all of those inner cubes and the engage process with that purple line. That's because it impacts every single one of them. That's the key here. Continual improvement is the key to our success in Itil 4 because we never want to stop improving. Information security management. Our next general management practice is information security management. For the exam, you simply need to recall the definition of the information security management practice. And that definition is that the information security management practice is there to protect the information needed by the organization to conduct its business. What is information security management really all about, though? Well, it's all about understanding and managing risks to your confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication, and non-repudiation of your information systems. If you think about it this way, information security is all about cybersecurity. We want to prevent things like data breaches and hackers from attacking us. When we think about confidentiality, we want to make sure our data remains confidential, which means it's safe from prying eyes. We do this usually by encrypting our data, and that way somebody can't go in, steal it, and look at it. When we talk about integrity of our data, we're really focused on making sure the data doesn't change either in transit, in use, or when it's being stored. To do this, we usually do a hashing function against the information, and that gives us a digital fingerprint so we can know whether or not a file has been changed by a malicious attacker. When we talk about availability, we're thinking about things like making sure that a customer can get access to the data when and where they need it. So if I had a website that had great confidentiality and great integrity, but you could never access it, well, then it has horrible availability, and it means that service is going to fail. So availability is really important. The way that we get good availability is by making sure we have redundant systems and highly available systems, such as ones that have multiple connections to the outside world. So we might have 2 internet connections, we might have 2 sets of switches, and 2 sets of servers. So if one goes down, the other one can carry the load. The next one we're going to talk about is authentication. And authentication is concerned with making sure that you are who you say you are when you're requesting access to the information. The most common form of authentication is a username and password, but there's lots of other ways to do authentication. You might use a biometric thumbprint like I do on my iPhone when I log in. Or my wife has an iPhone X. She uses her face, which again is a biometric method. You might have a system where when you log in with your username and password, it emails back a code to your email that you then have to access and then put that code in to access the system. That's a form of two-factor authentication. Other systems like this might send you a text message code, and so that way you can verify you have your phone, something you have, and you know your username and password, something you know. Again, this is the whole idea of authentication, proving you are who you say you are. And that brings us to our last one, non-repudiation. With non-repudiation, we're trying to make sure that you are who you say you are, and you can't say you didn't do what you did. Non-repudiation is really focused on the fact of if you took an action on a website, you have no way to say you didn't do it. Now, there's lots of ways to ensure non-repudiation, and most of them involve having some form of proper authentication. For example, if I wanted to have non-repudiation of an email I sent you, I can digitally sign it with my private key. And if I do that, it means that nobody else could have signed it with that private key because I'm the only one who has it. And that means you know I actually sent it. So even if I said, I didn't send that email, you can go, yeah, you did. I have proof right here. That's the concept of non-repudiation. Now again, for the Itil 4 exam, you only need to know the purpose of information security management. Again, that purpose is to protect the information needed by the organization to conduct its business. This is something you want to make sure you have down in your notes and you're memorizing before the exam. Relationship management. Our next practice is relationship management, and for the exam, you do need to understand the purpose of relationship management and memorize this definition. The purpose of relationship management is to establish and nurture the links between the organization and its stakeholders at strategic and tactical levels. Now, we do this by identifying, analyzing, monitoring, and doing continual improvement of those relationships between various stakeholders. The most common of these relationships is the one between the service provider and the service consumer. So in our relationship, I'm the service provider and you're the service consumer. I want to make sure that you're happy. I want to make sure that your needs are met. And by understanding all of that and having a proper relationship between us, I'm hoping that you're going to come and take more courses from us and that you're going to pass this exam and you're going to be happy and tell all your friends. If that happens, then I have some good things that come out of this relationship management practice. Now, when we look at this about stakeholders at strategic and tactical levels, it's not just service provider and service consumer though. There are a lot of other ones in there. So as I'm going through and I'm building those relationships, I need to monitor those relationships. I need to identify the needs of those relationships. What exactly does that stakeholder need? There may be a stakeholder who is asking for a new product or service. Well, as part of relationship management, we're going to talk to them and identify exactly what all of those needs are that they have. We can then put that into our requirements and figure out how we're going to build to those. As we do that, we're going to monitor that and make sure that we're meeting all the things we needed to, and then we're going to make sure that it's done properly, and we'll go through continual improvement to make that go through again and get it better than it was before. The whole idea here with relationship management, again, is to establish and nurture the links between the organization and its various stakeholders at strategic and tactical levels. If you remember that for the exam, you're going to do great. Supplier management. The supplier management practice is the last one you have to remember from the general management section. As we talk about this, you need to remember the definition of the purpose of supplier management. The purpose of supplier management is to ensure the organization's suppliers and their performance are managed appropriately to support the provisioning of seamless, quality products, services, and components. Really, what this means is that we are going to make sure that we have a good relationship with our suppliers, and that way we can ensure that we're creating these close, collaborative relationships with those key suppliers to uncover and realize new value and reduce our risk of failure. If I rely heavily on a certain person to provide us a service or a supply, we want to make sure we have a good relationship so we know when things might not be working right. If we have that, they'll be able to come and tell us, hey, you know what? We know we promised that we were going to have this delivered to you by Friday, but we're running behind and it's now going to be until Monday. I'd rather them tell me that now so I can plan for that than Friday comes along and the thing doesn't arrive. This is the idea with supplier management. By having good relationships, we can ensure we get better products, more quality products, and better service and supplies. So again, remember, the purpose of the supplier management practice is to ensure the organization's suppliers and their performance are managed appropriately to support the provision of seamless, quality products, services, and components. Keep that in mind for the exam, and you'll do great on any supplier management questions. Architecture management. This is another one that you don't need to know for the foundation level exam, but we're going to cover it to give you a good general understanding of it. The practice of architecture management is one that's focused on providing an understanding of all of the different elements that make up an organization and how those elements interrelate, enabling the organization to effectively achieve its current and future objectives. Now, this provides the organization with the principles, the standards, and the tools that will enable us to manage complex changes in a much more structured and agile way. There are 5 different types of architectures that you should consider inside your business. These are business architecture, service architecture, information systems architecture, technology architecture, and environmental architecture. Business architecture allows an organization to look at its capabilities to determine how they align with the different activities that are required for that business to co-create value for its customers. Now, service architecture is going to give the organization a view of its services and their interactions to better understand how they're all going to interrelate and tie together. This usually results in a service model being created, and this can act as a template or a blueprint for multiple services across the organization. When we look at information systems architecture, we're focused on the logical and physical data assets of the organization and how they're managed and shared to benefit our overall goals. The technology architecture is going to define the software and the hardware infrastructure that's needed to support the portfolio of services and the products the organization offers. For example, to answer the question of whether we should use a self-hosted configuration for our web servers or if we should rely on a cloud-based architecture would fall under this technology architecture umbrella. And finally, environmental architecture. This is used to describe the external factors that affect and impact our organization. If you remember our discussion of pesto earlier on, this model would fall under the environmental architecture. Things like political, environmental, social, technological. You get the idea. All of those things are external to our organization, so they're considered environmental. Knowledge management. This is another one that is not covered by the Itil 4 exam, but it's one that we're going to cover briefly to give you a general awareness. Knowledge management is focused on providing an understanding of all of the different elements that make up an organization and how those elements relate to one another. So when I think about knowledge management, I'm thinking about collecting all of the data and everything that's inside the organization. In fact, when we talk about knowledge management, there are 4 things that we look at. We have the baseline of data, and then built from data, we get information. When we get more information, we can consolidate it together in context to get knowledge, and then from knowledge, we can get to the top thing we want, which is wisdom, where we can make good decisions. Now, let me give you a good example of this. Let me give you a piece of data, 90. By itself, 90 doesn't mean much to you, does it? But if I give you that data with a little bit of context, it can become information. For example, I could say 90 degrees. Now you know that it's a temperature. And maybe I told you it's 90 degrees outside. Now you know it's the weather temperature for the outside area we're in. Now if I take that information and I combine it with some other information, I might be able to get knowledge out of this. 90 degrees is a hot temperature outside. I may decide now that I want to wear shorts and a t-shirt instead of long pants and a jacket because 90 degrees is pretty hot. Now, if I take a bunch of knowledge together, I can combine it to get wisdom, and this will allow me to make forward-looking decisions. For example, because it's 90 degrees outside, there may become a larger number of users who decide to skip work today and go to the beach. Knowing that we're a company who provides wireless service around the beaches as well, we better be prepared to increase the available bandwidth and be prepared for additional phone calls from mobile users because they're going to be out on their phones instead of on their desktops today. You can see how we could take this information from data into information, information into knowledge, and knowledge into wisdom. Knowledge management is a huge field. In fact, there are entire people whose full-time job it is to figure out how we're going to take data and turn it into information, information into knowledge, and knowledge into wisdom. Measurement and reporting. Measurement and reporting is another one of those practices that's not covered by the Itil 4 exam. but it's a good one to know because there are pieces of this that we've discussed already. Now, measurement and reporting is the practice of supporting good decision making and continual improvement by decreasing levels of uncertainty. We do this by measuring things. If you remember back in our continual improvement model, we talked about measuring and creating a baseline. And then after we took action, we went back and measured again to see how things changed. That's what measuring and reporting is all about. When discussing measurement and reporting, two key terms come up a lot. It's KPIs, or Key Performance Indicators, and CSFs, or Critical Success Factors. We've already discussed both of these back when we talked about the model inside continual improvement. Now, when you talk about measurement and reporting, remember what I said very early on in this course. It's very easy to measure outputs, but it's difficult to measure outcomes. One of the difficulties of this practice is being able to figure out what things you really should be measuring and are you measuring the right things, because we want to make sure we're measuring the outcome and not just the outputs. Again, this is an entire field with people who are dedicated to it. You're going to get people from business analysis that are going to be working in this field that really help you drive those numbers and figure out what are those key metrics that your business needs. Organizational change management. This is our next practice, and again, it's for general awareness, not on the exam. Organizational change management is the practice of ensuring that changes in an organization are smoothly and successfully implemented, and that lasting benefits are achieved by managing the human aspects of changes. Now, this is different from change management you may have dealt with in the technical world. In the technical world, maybe I want to make a change to the baseline. I want to take this server and I want to add an additional hard drive. That would be change management, but it's not organizational change management. Instead, we find organizational change management often occurs as part of process improvements and continual improvement processes. Now, if I'm going to go through and change the processes of how we do things or the way we conduct business, I have to help change the culture and the acceptance across that culture within the organization. This is why it's important to manage that human aspect of changes. We want to make sure that we're getting the humans involved so that they can change things and that those changes are long-lasting. That's what organizational change management is all about. It's how I keep the momentum going when I'm dealing with a continual improvement. Because without that change of the person, those changes are going to be short-lived. So we have to change the organizational culture along with it. And that's what organizational change management is really focused on. Portfolio management. Our next practice we're going to discuss for your general knowledge is portfolio management. This is the practice of ensuring that an organization has the right mix of programs, projects, products, and services to execute its strategy within its funding and resource constraints. Now, what does this really mean? Let's take my company, for example, Dion Training. There are a lot of different products, projects, programs, and services that we could be using. We could be doing a lot of different things, but we have to figure out what works with our strategy. For example, we might make practice exam courses. We might make video courses. We might do live training. We might create apps in the App Store. We might write a book. There's lots of things we can do. And in our first couple of years, we did a lot of those things. In fact, all of those things. But over time, we figured out where our true strengths were. And we figured out what our vision for the company was, and we built a strategy around it. So now, based on that strategy, we've assigned certain funding and resource constraints. The biggest resource constraint is really the amount of people we have that can teach this stuff and having the right people on staff to do it. And so we're limited in the amount of stuff we can do. So based on those restraints, we figure out what is the proper mix of programs, projects, products, and services to give you the best experience and give you the most bang for your buck. For us, for example, inside the Itil framework, we do the foundation level exams and we're going to do all of the Itil 4 exams. That was a decision we made. But we are not doing all of the Itil 3 intermediate certifications because those were coming to end of life in the next 12 to 18 months. And so it didn't make sense for our vision and our strategy to put a lot of resources into building those exams when those exams are going to be sunset in just 12 or 18 months, whereas Itil 4 is brand new and will last for many years to come. That's the idea inside your organization. You need to think about what is the right mix of products and services and programs, and portfolio management helps you do that. You figure out exactly what you want to do, and then you build towards that. Our next practice is project management. Now, unlike portfolio management, where we're trying to figure out what are the different projects and products and services that we should create, Project management is focused on a single product or service or project that we're trying to get through. Project management is the practice of ensuring that all of our organization's projects are delivered successfully. So when I decide to make this course became a project. We then went through our Prince2 methodologies and we built the entire course based on that project management lifecycle. As we moved it from our idea through the different phases to finally getting it completed and getting it out to you, that took the project from idea all the way through to delivery. And if we do that properly, we can do it successfully if we're using a good project management process. Now, why is project management so important? Well, let's say you need to install a brand new network for your organization. It's going to be hundreds of computers, dozens of servers, lots of racks of network equipment, and all of that kind of stuff. Well, if you were doing it all by yourself, you might not need project management. But you're probably going to have a team of 5 or 10 or 50 people working for you. And if you have a large team, everyone needs to know what their role is and what pieces need to be done and when those pieces need to be done at which piece of time. Do I need to get the servers in first or the racks in first? Do I need to get the workstations online before or after the servers? All of those things are things that are going to be handled within project management. They're going to figure out the timing, the sequencing, and making sure we can get from the idea and the plans to the final execution successfully. Project management is a huge field, and if you're interested in project management, I recommend looking into the Prince2 courses, which are focused on project management, or doing something like PMP, which is Project Management Professional. Depending on where you live in the world, one of those two certifications is going to be more popular. Here in the United States, PMP tends to be a little bit more popular. If you're in Europe or Asia, Prince2 seems to be more popular. So if you want to get into project management, those would be my recommendation, looking at those two courses. The next practice we're going to discuss is risk management. And again, this is just for your general awareness, but it is one we've talked about earlier on in our course because we did talk about those 4 things you can do with risk. When we talk about risk management, this practice is focused on ensuring that an organization understands and handles its risk effectively. Now, when we look at risk, there are 4 things you can do with it. You can avoid risk, you can mitigate risk, you can transfer risk, or you can accept risk. When you avoid risk, you're going to change the situation so that risk doesn't exist anymore. I like to use the example of if your company has a computer that's running Windows XP, that's a highly risky event. Well, you can avoid that risk completely by turning off that computer, upgrading it to Windows 10, and now you have that risk completely avoided because you're no longer having the risk of having this old, outdated system. Now, mitigation, on the other hand, is where we're going to put some things in place to help lower the amount of risk. For example, if I wanted to drive my car from here to the store, I'm not going to drive at 60 miles an hour. I decide I'm going to drive 30 miles an hour. That lowers my risk because it gives me more time to react to issues. That's a risk mitigation. When I talk about risk transference, that's when I'm going to transfer the risk to somebody else. In the example of my car, I have an insurance policy on my car. If I get into an accident, I'm not the one who assumes that risk. The insurance company is. They're going to pay for the damages because I've paid them a premium and that transferred the risk from me to them for that financial issue. And finally, we have risk acceptance. If you have a risk that's small enough, you might just decide you're going to accept it. For example, there are risks every day that you deal with and you just simply accept them. When you get in the car to drive to work, there's a risk you could get into an accident. Yes, you've transferred the financial risk, but if you get into an accident, you're still going to get hurt, right? Well, you figured that that risk is small enough that you have accepted that risk, whether willingly or unwillingly, so that you can drive your car to work. That's the idea when you deal with risk management. It's identifying all of the risks that are going to exist for our products and services, as well as our projects as we're deploying them, and then we try to mitigate them, transfer them, avoid them, or accept them, and that way we know what we're dealing with. The next practice we're going to discuss is service financial management. Now, service financial management, again, is one that's just for your general knowledge. It's not covered on the exam. This practice is focused on supporting the organization's strategies and plans for service management, and it does this by ensuring that the organization's financial resources and their investments are being used effectively. So if you've ever decided to make a recommendation to your boss that we should go and buy XYZ system or XYZ software product and install it in our system, at some point he's probably asked you, well, how much is it going to cost and is it worth it? Service financial management is that whole back-end process to verify that we have enough money to buy the things that you want to get, and that what you want to get is going to give us a good return on our investment so that we can actually use our capital in the most effective way. There's a ton of things that we can buy with our organization's money, but we want to make sure we're doing it responsibly and that we're going to get the best bang for our buck. Service financial management is all of those back-end things that the accountants are going to do and the business analysts are going to do to ensure that our company remains financially solvent and that we're able to continue operating because we have money to pay our employees, pay for our services, pay for our contracts, and keep the business afloat. Strategy management. This is another practice for your general knowledge, and it's not covered by the exam. Strategy management is the practice of formulating the goals of an organization and adopting the courses of action and allocation of resources necessary for achieving those goals. Strategy management is simply responsible for establishing the organization's direction, focusing our effort, defining and clarifying our organizational priorities, and providing consistency or guidance in response to the environment. Normally, strategy management is going to be done at very high levels in your organization. You're going to get direction from the CEO as well as the other C-suite executives on which way the organization should be going. And they're going to do this based on the changing environment that they see outside of the organization. For example, let's go back to the early 2000s and think about the company called Kodak. Kodak was a film company. And around the early 2000s, digital cameras were starting to outpace the way that traditional film companies were operating because most people were moving from a regular camera to a digital camera. Well, if you think about it nowadays, here in 2019, how many people have a film camera anymore? Almost nobody, right? Well, that would put Kodak out of business because their major profit center was film. And so what they had to start doing was figuring out with their strategy, should they pivot? Should they move from film to digital cameras? And they tried to do that, but they did it a little bit too late. And so they didn't really get enough of a go, and that company ended up not doing well in the long term. The reason for this was they didn't see the writing on the wall. They didn't pivot quick enough because their strategy didn't change quick enough. Strategy management is focused on doing that. It's being able to see what the future is and turning the organization before that future hits you. That's the whole goal here. We want to be able to focus our effort, define our organizational priorities, and make sure that we're all aiming towards the same vision. Workforce and talent management. This is our final practice as a general management practice, and this is going to finish up this section. This practice, again, is not covered by the exam, but it's one that you probably deal with on a daily basis. Workforce and talent management is there to ensure that an organization has the right people with the appropriate skills and knowledge in the correct roles to support its business objectives. This practice covers a wide variety of activities focused on successfully engaging with the organization's employees and people-based resources, including how to plan for them, recruit them, onboard them, help them in their learning and development, ensure you're doing proper performance measurement of them, and doing succession planning. There is a lot to this. In fact, the entire field of human resources rests inside of workforce and talent management. Now, we're not going to go into all of the details of this, but think about it this way. Your company is really nothing without its people. We want to make sure we have the best people, and that means we have to figure out how we're going to plan to recruit them. We need to recruit them. We need to hire them and bring them on board. We want to make sure that they're being adapted over time by learning and developing their resources for better abilities. And we want to measure their abilities to make sure we're getting the resources out of them that we expect and they're performing to the level they should. All of this are things that are important inside workforce and talent management because people are usually considered the #1 resource of any company. I know at our company, if we lost a couple of our lead people, we would be in really dire straits. So we want to make sure that we have the right people and we're developing new people to take over those roles when those people decide to leave us, and that's called succession planning. Service management practices. Service management practices have been developed in the service management and IT service management industries over the last 20 to 30 years. Under Itil 4, there are 17 practices that are going to be in the service management category. We're going to briefly cover all of them in this section of the course. Now, of these 17 practices, you need to know 6 of them in depth, and you need to know 4 of them at the recall level of the exam. On the exam, you have to be able to understand and explain how change control, incident management, problem management, service desk, service level management, and service request management practices work and function. Also, you need to be able to recall the purposes of IT asset management, monitoring and event management, release management, and service configuration management practices. After we've covered those first 10, then we're going to go and cover the rest of them. And these are ones that we're going to cover just for a general awareness, not that you need to know them for the exam. This includes availability management, business analysis, capacity and performance management, service catalog management, service continuity management, service design, and service validation and testing practices. But again, these practices won't be on your certification exam. Change control. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the change control practice. Now, for the exam, this is one of the ones you need to know in depth. You need to be able to recall its definition and purpose, as well as terms associated with it and how it operates. So, let's get started. The purpose of the change control practice is to maximize the number of successful IT changes by ensuring that the risks have been properly assessed, authorizing changes to proceed, and managing the change schedule. Basically, change control is what we used to call change management. It's all about making sure that before we make a change, we understand the risk, we know who's approved it, and we manage it on the schedule. So when we do this, this is all a balancing act. We want to balance the beneficial effect of changes against protecting ourselves from adverse effects of changes. Just think about it this way. Every time you change something, you're introducing a risk of failure. And so the change has to be worthwhile. We like things that are stable and working properly, but we also like new features and value. And so a lot of times we have to make changes, but that's going to affect the stability of the system. And so we want to be able to manage that risk using risk management as well as this change control. Now, the scope of change control is defined by each organization. This is something that's going to be decided by your governance, your policies, and your procedures within your particular company. It's going to include all of the IT infrastructure, the applications, the documentation, the processes, the supplier relationships, and anything else that might directly or indirectly impact a product or service that we're going to change. Now, I mentioned there were 7 terms that you had to learn definitions of during the study of our practices. Well, here's the first one. It's called a change. Now, a change is the addition, modification, or removal of anything that could have a direct or indirect effect on IT services. There's actually 3 different types of changes. These are standard, normal, and emergency changes. A standard change is something that's pre-authorized. It's something that we can implement without additional authorization. This is because it's something we do all of the time. The risks are well understood, and therefore it's going to be low risk. A good example of this would be if somebody calls up and asks to reset their password. That is something that a service desk analyst can do on their own. They don't need any kind of approval because it's already been pre-authorized. This is a simple, well-understood change, but it is still a change to the system. Our second type of change is what we call a normal change. These are changes where authorization is going to have to be gained, but that level of authorization is going to be based on the different types of change and how risky it is. So if this was a low or a medium risk thing, but we don't consider it a standard change, it's going to go through the normal process. And the person who approves it is who's called a change authority. If it's going to be something that's low or medium risk, that change authority might be your supervisor or their boss. But if you have a major change, this might be something that's really complex. It's going to need a higher level of approval, and it's going to go all the way up until we get to a very senior change authority. Again, this is going to depend on how your organization does it, how much tolerance they have to risk, and how they want to set it up. Let me give you an example of a normal change. Let's say that you wanted to upgrade your server from Windows 2012 to Windows 2019. This is a major change, so we want to make sure we properly plan for that change. We want to make sure we get the necessary coordination done ahead of time, and we want to make sure all the right approvals have been done before we ever attempt to install that new server software. That's the idea here with a normal change. We're going to schedule it and plan it, we're going to go and get a downtime for it, and we're going to do that change and make sure it all works properly. We've got time, we're not in a rush. Now, sometimes though, we are in a rush, and this is when things come up like an emergency, and so we have emergency changes. These are going to be expedited, and they're going to have an expedited assessment and authority process. It may be that there's a separate change authority for something that is an emergency. For example, I used to work as an IT director, and normally for a big change, I had to go up to my boss, who is the CIO. But if it was an emergency, I was the change authority, and I had permission to make those changes. So I might get a call at 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and they say that our file server just crashed. The hard drives in it are completely dead, and they need to be replaced with spares from a backup server, and while we're doing that, we need to change some of the configurations. Well, this is going to constitute a change, but we don't have time to go through all of the necessary paperwork of a normal change requirement. So instead, we're going to go through an emergency change advisory board. We're going to get people together, quickly decide on how risky it is, do our assessment, and then either approve or disapprove this because it's an emergency. We need to get this server back up. Then, when we come back in on Monday morning, we can worry about going back and doing all of the normal change requirement paperwork and going through the regular processes to make sure everything has gotten updated in the system. That's the difference. An emergency is when you're really trying to get something back online quickly because something is broke and it needs to be gotten up right now. A lot of organizations will use their emergency as something as a normal way of business. You don't want to do this. And what I mean by this is just because somebody wants the change done today doesn't mean it's necessarily an emergency. It may be they just forgot to plan. So you have to think about what really is an emergency versus what is normal and should go through the normal process. If something is broken and you need to get the server back online, that's usually going to be an emergency. Now, as I said, the person or group who authorizes the change is what we call a change authority. In very fast-moving organizations, it's common to have this decentralized, and we might have many different change authorities depending on what's going on. In fact, if you're doing software development, your change authority might be the person sitting next to you. It might be that you review their code and approve it, and they approve your code. But in big organizations, a lot of times we want to do things much more formally, and we'll go through this normal change process and have a formalized change authority. Now, once something has been approved from the change authority, it goes on to the change schedule. The change schedule is used to help us plan those changes, assist in communicating that, and helping to avoid conflicts and assign proper resources to it. Let me give you a good example of this. This weekend, I want to upgrade my website, and we're going to be down for an hour while we change servers. That's something that I'm going to email out ahead of time to all of my students so they know that this Friday, if they try to log on, they're not going to be able to for that hour. That's the idea of having a change schedule in place. We already know it's going to happen. We can tell you weeks in advance, and that way everybody knows. It's well coordinated, well planned, and well communicated. And by doing that, I can make sure I have my top level guys sitting there ready to go when we make this change. So if anything goes wrong, we have the A-list people there who can fix it and make it right. So when we talk about all of this change stuff, it does affect different parts of our value chain activities. For example, we have a part in plan. Changes for our products and our service portfolios, our policies and practices all require some amount of control and planning. And so plan is going to help us with that. We also have a lot of improvement initiatives, right? And when we go through improvement initiatives, those are going to have changes to be made. For example, if I want to move from an older server to a new server, that's a change. And so we're going to use the change control as part of the improve activity as well. When we talk about engage, our customers and our users need to know what kind of changes are coming, when downtimes are, and they should be able to expect the nature of that change. Again, by communicating this, we're engaging with our customers. So we're going to use that engage activity. Then if we look in our design and transition, these changes are all designed and initiated somewhere, right? Usually in design, and then transition. Once we approve a change, it goes into transition to be made into reality and put into our real network. Now, this is where the change control activity is a major contributor into the transition phase. Then we're going to obtain and build things, right? Anytime I want to change something, it means I'm probably buying something new, whether it's software or it's hardware, or I'm building some kind of custom software in-house. All of that goes on in the obtain build. Once it's ready, it's going to be an input into this change control practice so that we can get it approved and then transitioned onto the real servers. And then finally, deliver and support. Changes can have an impact on deliver and support. They can have a huge impact there because if I put a new server on, that changes the way they have to do their processes. That changes the way they do their procedures. All of that stuff is going to be changed. We also want to make sure we're communicating the changes both to our users, but also to the personnel who have to support those users. If I don't tell the service agents that we went from server 2012 to server 2019, and they now have to support 2019 without any training, that's not going to be good. So change is going to make sure that we're thinking about those type of things as well. We want to make sure everybody knows what change is coming and we communicate that well so everyone is ready. Incident management. This is the next practice we're going to talk about, and again, it's one that you need to know in depth for the exam. The purpose of incident management is to minimize the negative impact of incidents by restoring normal service operation as quickly as possible. Basically, what are you going to do when something goes wrong? Now, I mentioned there's a couple of terms you have to memorize, and here comes our second term. It's an incident. An incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or reduction in the quality of a service. Every incident needs to be logged, managed to the agreed upon target resolution times, and prioritized. The way we design our incident management practice appropriately is going to make sure that we think about it from different perspectives with different incidents. So I want to take my incidents and I want to categorize them based on the different impacts they have. Is it a major incident or a minor incident? Is it an information security incident or is it a management and operations incident? All of these are things that we have to think about as we're going through our incident management practice. Now, when it comes to prioritizing our incidents, I like to do it based on an agreed classification. Everyone should know what that classification is. Are we going to use high, medium, and low? Are we going to use a 1 through 5 system? Whatever it is, you need to know it, your customers need to know it, and everyone who supports the systems needs to know it. Also, we should have a way to say what would categorize a high incident, what would categorize a low incident. Is it based on dollar time? Is it based on the person's position in the company? Is it going to be based on how much the thing costs? Is it going to be based on how long we think it's going to be down? All of those are valid ways to classify it. It really depends on how your organization decides to do it. Also, when you're prioritizing incidents, you need to ensure that your incidents that have the highest business impact are resolved first. That means if it's something that's affecting 5 users or something that's affecting 10,000 users, we probably want to fix the thing affecting 10,000 users first. It has a higher business impact. Or if it's something that may be a minor inconvenience versus something that's costing you money, you want to get the thing that costs you money fixed first. Now, when it comes to incident management, you want to use a tool to log and manage your incidents. This is a way that you can end up linking them to configuration items, to the different changes, to the different problems, known errors, and other things. By having a good system, it really does make the knowledge management piece a lot easier and helps you resolve incidents much faster. Another thing these can do for you is they can provide incident matching to other incidents, other problems, and other known errors. So for example, if you call up and tell me, hey, the wireless network in the warehouse is down, I can log that and it can say, oh, we've already had 3 other people call that in. We know it's a problem affecting a lot of users. We should probably raise the classification from a low to a medium or a medium to a high. Again, this is the benefit of having a good incident management tool. Incidents can also be escalated for higher levels of support. Oftentimes, your service desk, who's your first person who's taking in the incident, isn't going to be the person who's going to resolve it. Instead, if they can't solve it at their level, they'll raise it to Tier 2 support. And if Tier 2 can't do it, it'll go to Tier 3 support. And you'll keep going up until you get to the right level of support to get that resolved. This routing is typically going to be based on the incident's category. Anyone working on an incident should provide quality and timely updates back into this incident management system. Because as we're going to talk about in the service desk, your service desk analyst is the front line. They're going to be the ones talking to the customer. And when the customer says, hey, is my ticket resolved yet? They need to know about it. If you've been working it and you haven't been putting it in the incident management system, the analyst doesn't know the updates and the customer doesn't get the communication. Now, when we talk about incident management, I want you to remember that incident management requires a high level of collaboration within and between the teams. Like I was saying, if you're solving the issue, you need to tell that to the service desk. You also need to work between your teams and across your teams. When we're working to diagnose and resolve an incident, your user might end up using a self-help option. They might use calling the service desk as an option. The service desk might contact your support team, your suppliers, or even your partners. All of this is collaboration and communication. So we have to think about all of this as we work through it. And the other thing I want you to remember is that some incidents can be very major and some can be minor. If you have a really major incident, one of the things you might want to do is create a temporary cross-functional team to address that incident. For example, maybe our website went down. Well, I might want to get some people from finance in here because it's going to affect them, some people from marketing because it affects them, some people from sales because it affects them, and then of course all of our technical people. So we can figure out how we can create a workaround and get this incident resolved as quickly as possible. In addition to all of that, you may be doing an incident response based on a disaster recovery operation. And if this is the case, you want to bring in the disaster recovery team as well, because they know the plans and policies of what we're going to do to overcome that disaster. All of this is going to depend on your particular scenario that you're involved with in your incident. Let me give you an example. Maybe your organization is the victim of a cyber attack or a data breach that's ongoing. What's the best way to handle this scenario? Well, if it was me and my company, I might use a technique known as swarming. This involves gathering up different stakeholders who initially all work together until it becomes clear which of them is best suited to lead this effort and solve the incident. Once that occurs, we can then release the others back to their assigned tasks, and the lead will take the charge of this. Now, the reason we do this is because it gives us all of the people right away, and this is really important when you're dealing with a major incident like a cyber attack or a data breach. I might not know exactly where that person is inside the network yet. Are they dealing with the databases, the file servers, the web servers? I don't know. So I want people from all of those teams here working with me. That's what we call swarming. And then once we figure out, oh, it was a database breach, then we can let the web guys go and the file server guys go, and we'll still work with the database team. That's the way we want to do this kind of stuff. It's the way that we're trying to figure out how we can best solve our incidents. When we think about incidents, I want you to think about the fact that it heavily relies on collaboration to facilitate information sharing and learning, as well as helping to solve the incident more efficiently and more effectively. That's what we're trying to do. So when we think about this through our value chain activity lens, which ones are going to be affected? Well, let's start with improve. When we're talking about improve, we're going to be thinking about the incident records in our incident management system. These are a key input to our improve activities. If we can go in there and find the frequency and severity of different incidents, we can figure out where we need to put more resources, time, or money to improve ourselves. Now, if we consider this from the engage activity, we have to think about the fact that incidents are visible to everyone. Your users are going to know about it, and your customers are going to know about it. So we're going to have to engage with them and let them know ahead of time how we're solving these problems, and the fact that we know that it's a problem and that we're going to overcome it. When we think about this from design and transition, if we have an incident, it might occur in a test environment, which happens during design. It might also happen during the release and deployment, which is part of transition. Either way, we want to make sure the incident management practice is there to help us ensure the incidents are resolved in a timely and controlled manner. When we think about this from an obtain build perspective, we want to think about the fact that incidents occur in development environments too, right? And so as I'm obtaining and building things, things break. How are we going to solve those problems? The incident management practice has things in place to help us with those as well, because we want to make sure we're figuring those things out early before we move it into transition, and then from transition over to deliver and support. Which brings us to deliver and support. Deliver and support is where we spend a lot of time in incident management, because this is a significant contributor to supporting our users. Deliver and support's value chain activity includes the resolving of incidents and problems, identifying them, solving them, and communicating that back to the user. Again, that goes back into our engage again. So, as we were talking, all of this is really important inside incident management. How do we identify, diagnose, and solve all these problems as quickly and efficiently as possible? That's what it all comes down to. Problem management. This is another one that you need to know in depth. Now, for the exam, I want you to remember the purpose of problem management. This is to reduce the likelihood and impact of incidents by identifying actual and potential causes of incidents and managing workarounds and known errors. In this definition, there's two key terms that you need to be able to recall for the exam. They are the words problem and a known error. Now, a problem is a cause or potential cause of one or more incidents. Remember, an incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or a reduction in the quality of that service. If this happens more than once to the same type of thing, then it becomes a problem. Sometimes, though, a problem can be classified as a known error. A known error is a problem that has been analyzed and has not been resolved yet. For example, we recently underwent a website migration from one server to another. During that migration, we found that the login link on our website was routing users to the wrong place, and it was preventing them from logging in and accessing their training. Now, while our web developer was working to resolve the underlying issue, we were able to notify our users of this issue, and we told them that we had a known error and gave them a direct link to use to access the login page. By giving our users this direct link, we created what's known as a workaround. A workaround is a solution that reduces or eliminates the impact of an incident or problem for which a full resolution is not yet available. Sometimes these workarounds will help you to reduce the likelihood of incidents from occurring again, and these workarounds are documented in your problem records. Workarounds can then be created at any stage, and they don't need to wait for you to fully analyze the problem and have the full, complete solution done. Instead, if you have a workaround that's been documented early in the problem control stage, then this can be reviewed and improved after the problem analysis is fully completed. So when we talk about problem management, at its core, we have three major steps inside of it. The first is problem identification, the second is problem control, and the third is error control. When we talk about problem identification, here's where we're looking at things like trend analysis, identifying what recurring incidents or major incidents have happened. We're looking at all the supplier and partner information, the software developers, testers, and projects that are ongoing, and identifying any possible issues that may turn into problems for us. When we look at problem control, we're trying to prioritize and manage based on their risk. We might have 5 or 6 or 7 problems, but we only have enough time and money to solve one of them right now. Which one should we do first? Well, that becomes a prioritization and risk management decision. Also, we want to do our problem analysis from the perspective of all 4 dimensions. We want to think about it through all 4 of those lenses because it might be a problem that can be solved with people as opposed to technology, or vice versa. And then we go into error control. With error control, we're trying to identify potential permanent solutions for this problem. This allows us to reassess any status of known errors and improve our workarounds so that we can solve a lot of these problems. Problem management is a practice that relies heavily on other practices as well. Problem management has a large amount of overlap with the incident management, risk management, change control, knowledge management, and continual improvement practices. Each of these practices will either provide an input to problem management or receive information from problem management to better do their own jobs. Now, when we think about problem management and the value chain activities, it does impact a lot of them. Let's start with improve. When we think about improve, problem management and doing it effectively is going to provide us a better understanding of what needs to be done to reduce the number of incidents, thereby improving our services and our products. Now, engage, on the other hand, is going to be where we take problems that have significant impact to our services and tell our users and our customers about it. If we're telling our customers or users something, that's engage. When we think about it from a design and transition perspective, problem management is going to provide information that helps us to improve testing and knowledge transfer from those who are designing and transitioning those services into the real world. And once they hit the real world to deliver and support, that's when your service analysts have to know about it. When we look at it from an obtain and build perspective, it's very similar to this. Problem management activities are going to help us identify product defects that are managed as part of the overall value chain activity, and we want to transfer that information to the transition team and to the deliver and support team. And when we look at the deliver and support, problem management is going to make a significant contribution here, just like incident management did, because as we identify repetition of incidents, we can then try to find timely incident resolution and solve them for the longer term by solving the underlying problem. That's the way we want to do this as we look at problem management. We want to find things that happen again and again and again and solve the root cause instead of having to keep playing whack-a-mole with all of the minor little incidents. That's the whole goal here inside of the project management practice. The service desk. This is another practice that you have to know in depth. Luckily, it's probably the one you already know the most about because most of us have dealt with a service desk at some point in our life. The purpose of the service desk practice is to capture demand for incident resolution and service requests. It should also be the entry point or single point of contact for your service provider for all of its users. Now, once that issue, request, or query is received by the service desk, they're going to acknowledge it, classify it, own it, and act upon it. This is the process and the workflow that's generally used for a service desk practice. Now, the reason why this is your single point is because your service desk is going to be able to take in everything, whether it's a change request, whether it's a request for service, or whether it's an incident, and they can route it to the appropriate desk. Now, this isn't the way service desks were originally designed, though. The role of the service desk has changed. It used to be that we had a simple help desk that was there to solve technical issues. But more recently, it's become the one-stop shop for everything between the users and the service provider. This new focus of the service desk is to provide support for the people and business rather than simply the technical issues. Our service desk has a major influence on the user's experience and how the users are going to perceive the service provider. And so it's really important that we get the service desk right. Now, because of this, the service desk has become really important. In fact, for most people, this is one of the first places you'll work when you work in IT service management. The service desk has to have a practical understanding of the entire organization and how it functions because they are the gatekeeper. Everything comes into them and then they have to route it to the right place. This service desk has to be the empathetic link between the service provider and its users. And that's why a lot of times you'll find it's not even the most technical people that work at the service desk. The service desk instead focuses on excellent customer service experiences with personal contact when it's needed by the user. This is why soft skills are really important over technical skills for service desk personnel. Your support and development teams need to work in close collaboration with your service desk, passing information to and from the service desk because the service desk is the one who's going to interact with your users and know the needs that they have and the demands. When the customer calls up and says, hey, what's the current status of my ticket? They're talking to the service desk, not the technician. And so that technician needs to make sure they're feeding that information back to the service desk so the service desk can engage with the customer. Now, how does a user access the service desk for assistance though? Well, this is going to depend on your organization, but you may rely on phone calls, service portals, live chat with a real person, a chat bot, email, walk-in services, text messages, social media messaging, or even discussion board forums. It really depends on how your company wants to do it. Now, there are 4 main types of service desks. They are local, centralized, virtual, and follow the sun. With a local service desk, these are going to be co-located within or physically close to the users that it serves. This often is going to aid in communication, provides a very clear presence of the person there, and it can support a local language or cultural differences if needed. But the big problem is it's often inefficient and expensive because you're tying up a single person to be inside this office and they may not have enough calls to justify 40 hours a week of work. Now, a centralized service desk, on the other hand, tries to avoid that. They try to put all of the service desk people in one area, and everyone calls a single 1-800 number or goes to a certain website to get support. This can be very efficient and cost-effective because it allows fewer staff to deal with a much higher volume of calls. But it might also be necessary for you to still maintain some kind of local presence because some of these staff can't fix the problems on the other side of the world if they can't touch the desk. And so we try to handle anything that we can remotely through the centralized service desk while still maybe having 1 or 2 people at a local service desk. Then we have a virtual service desk. Now, because of the way we have technology these days, particularly the internet and voice over IP and all the corporate support tools that we have, it's possible for us to give you the impression that there's a single centralized service desk when in fact a virtual service desk is used instead. This virtual service desk allows agents to work from multiple geographically dispersed locations all around the world. It requires some sophisticated technology, but it does allow us to have access from anywhere in the world, and we can route those calls to the right agent no matter what time of the day it is across the globe. Our 4th model is what we call follow the sun. Follow the sun is where global corporations have to combine 2 or more geographically dispersed service desks to provide 24-hour follow the sun coverage. For example, maybe we had 3 service desks, one in London, one in New York, and one in India. By doing that, as it's daylight in London, they would take the calls. Once it's daylight in America, the New York office would take the calls. And then once it's daylight in India, they would take the calls. Regardless of where the customer is calling from, it would be whichever service desk was open at that particular time, so we can give a full 24 hours of coverage using those 3 service desks. That's the idea here when we talk about a service desk. We want to make sure our user has a place they can call and get support from anytime they need. Now, how do you run an effective service desk? Well, you need to have effective supporting technologies. This is especially true when you use a centralized, virtual, or follow-the-sun service desk model. These systems might be things like telephone systems, workflow systems, workflow management and resource planning systems, knowledge bases, call recording and remote access tools, dashboards and monitoring tools, configuration management systems, and many others. Now, when you're going to put a service desk together, you have to fill it with employees, right? What should you look for when you're hiring employees? Well, when you're hiring employees for a service desk position, you should look for people who have empathy, emotional intelligence, effective communication skills, excellent customer service skills, an understanding of the business priorities, and the ability to conduct incident analysis and prioritization. Notice, in that list, I didn't highlight a strong technical capability, did I? Instead, a service desk may be technical, but most of the time it doesn't have to be. Most service desks are more focused around the customer support and customer service aspects. They leave the technical details to the higher level of tiered support that's going to come in when something's wrong. Now, to finish up this lesson, let's talk about how the support desk integrates with the value chain activities. First, improve. The service desk activities are constantly monitoring and evaluating support for continual improvement, alignment, and value creation. They're going to get feedback from users, collect that, and pass that to the continual improvement process or practice. When we talk about engage, the service desk is there as our main channel for tactical and operational engagement with users. They're the ones contacting and talking with the users on a daily basis. When we talk about design and transition, the service desk is going to provide a channel for communicating with users about new and changed services. The service desk, again, is that engage part, right? So we're going to get this information from design and transition and pass it out to everybody else. Also, our service desk personnel can participate in release planning, testing, and early life support. When we think about obtain and build, the service desk can also be involved in acquiring service components that are used to fulfill service requests and resolve our incidents. Maybe somebody's hard drive has crashed. You, as a service desk analyst, might go and order the new hard drive. That's part of obtain and build. And finally, deliver and support. This is where the service desk is really focused. The service desk is the coordination point for managing all of the incidents, all the problems, and all of the service requests. And so it's really important that you get it right by making sure your service desk has the right people employed that have been the right training, and they understand how the whole organization works to get the best value for your end users. Service level management. This is another one you need to know in depth. First, let's start with the purpose. The purpose of the service level management practice is to set clear business-based targets for service performance so that the delivery of a service can be properly assessed, monitored, and managed against these targets. It's going to provide us with end-to-end visibility of the organization's services. It's going to do this by establishing a shared view of the services and the target service levels with the customers so both the customers and us know what to expect. We're also going to focus on collecting, analyzing, storing, and reporting the relevant metrics to ensure that we're meeting the service levels. We also want to make sure that we're performing service level reviews to ensure the current services continue to meet the organization and the customer's needs. We also are going to make sure that we're capturing and reporting service issues, including performance against our defined service levels. So if I said I want to have 99.999% uptime, service level management is going to measure my performance and see if I'm meeting that level. Now, all of these service levels are going to be written down in what's known as an SLA, or a service level agreement. A service level agreement is a documented agreement between a service provider and a customer that identifies services required and the expected level of service. This is going to tell you what metrics you need to meet. The SLA is a tool that's used to measure the performance of services from the customer's point of view. Now, there's a couple of things you need to do to make sure that you're going to have a successful SLA. First, you want to make sure it's related to a defined service. It can't be something generalized like customer is happy. What is the customer happy with? They're happy with the email service delivery. They want it to be fast. What does fast really mean, right? You need to make sure you're defining the outcome you want, not just operational metrics. So if the customer says, I want the email to be fast, well, does that mean if I get it there in 5 seconds they're happy? Or if I get there in 5 minutes they're happy? I need to be able to define really what does fast mean. And I don't want to just do that from an output perspective, but also from an outcome perspective. Also, we want to make sure our agreement is between the service provider and the service consumer, and it reflects their opinions accurately. Because if the customer says the email service should be fast, and they say 5 minutes is fast, but the customer, or the consumer in this case, would think that it needs to be fast, meaning 5 seconds, there's a disconnect there. So we want to make sure we understand it both from the customer's perspective in our contract, but also from our consumer's perspective, because that's really what the SLA should be focused on, is that service consumer. And the final key to writing a good SLA is making sure you write it simply. Make sure that it's easy to understand by all parties. This isn't a contract. It doesn't need to be written with legal jargon. Instead, make it simple and easy so that anyone who picks it up can understand what you're talking about. When you're writing your SLAs, you always want to be focused on the different relationships. That includes things like relationship management, your supplier management, the different skills and competencies, the business liaisons, and the business analysts. All of that is things that are going to feed into this SLA and making sure we understand who's responsible for what and to what level. Now, our service level management is built around these various information sources. One of those is our SLA, right? That's the customer engagement and the agreement we have. Other things that we have is going to be things like our customer engagement, where we're listening to our customers' needs. We're discovering and capturing the information they want from us. We want to get the measurement and the ongoing process discussions with them. We also want to ask simple open-ended questions. By getting that information from our service desk or our customer liaisons, we can get a lot of the information we need to build a good service level management program. And then afterwards, we want to get customer feedback. This can be something like a survey or looking at key business-related measures and metrics. We might be looking at some operational metrics like server uptime and capacity. We might look at some business metrics like monthly recurring revenue or lifetime value of a customer. All of that can go into this service level management as something that feeds into this practice. Now, as we look at this and we see how it affects our value chain activity, let's talk about the plan activity. In the plan activity, your service level management is going to support the planning of your products and your service portfolio and your service offerings, because all the information you get about the actual service performance and trends is going to feed into all that planning. When you think about it from the improved perspective, service level management can help be a driving force for continual improvement and service improvement. You saw that when we talked about the different steps of the continual improvement model. We had to measure things and then see if we met those targets. That's what SLM is all about. When we think about engage, service level management ensures we have ongoing engagement with our customers and our users through the feedback processes, and we're continually getting information from them for review. Now, when we think about this from a design and transition perspective, service level management provides an input to the design and development of new and changed services. If the customer wants fast email that's going to be less than 5-second delivery, then we need to design a system that can meet that requirement. And so this is going to be an input to that. When we think about obtain and build, service level management provides objectives for components and service performance, as well as measurement and reporting capabilities for the products and services we use. So obtain and build is going to get a lot of input from service level management. And finally, deliver and support. Service level management communicates the service performance objectives to the operations and support teams, so they know what they're trying to maintain. It's also going to collect information and feedback from them as an input back into the service level management and service improvements that we're going to do in the future. So this is the way it works. Service level management is all about these measures and metrics, setting up the right ones, doing the engagement with the customer to make sure that we're measuring the right things and seeing if we're going to meet those measurements. Service request management. This is the last practice that we're going to discuss in depth. The purpose of the service request management practice is to support the agreed quality of a service by handling all agreed user-initiated service requests in an effective and user-friendly manner. Now, service requests are predefined and pre-agreed, and they can usually be formalized with clear, standard procedures. That makes things really easy. For example, you might have one that says, let's create a new email distribution. There's a standard process for it and a standard request method to do it. Or maybe you need a headphone set to be attached to your computer at work. This might be, again, a service request. Maybe you want to go from a 15-inch monitor to a 21-inch monitor. That might be, again, a standard service request. There's basically 3 pieces that go with this standard service request. You have initiation, approval, and fulfillment. Now, service requests are normally part of service delivery, and they're not used for failure or degradation of a service. That's used in incident management. Instead, service requests are asking for things that are normal, things that we need. I need more shared drive space. I need a bigger email account. I need another email address. I need my account unlocked. Those are all things that would be service requests. A service request is simply a request from a user or a user's authorized representative that initiates a service action that has been agreed as a normal part of service delivery. The fulfillment of that service request may include changes to services or their components, and they usually are going to be considered a standard change because they're low risk and well understood. Some examples of these would be a request for a service delivery action, like get a new computer for the new employee we just hired. It might be a request for information. It might be a request for provision of a resource or a service. Give me 10 gigabytes of storage space instead of 5 gigabytes. It might be a request to get access to a resource or a service. Hey, I need access to the accounting share drive now because I just got transferred over there. That might be a good example, right? And it can also have feedback, compliments, and complaints. All of those might go through the service request process. Service requests and their fulfillment should always be standardized and automated to the greatest degree possible. Again, these are low-risk things. You want to try to do them as much as possible through a self-help system so you're not tying up good people using up full-time equivalent man hours or person hours on these standard service requests. Instead, we want to reserve those man hours or person hours or full-time equivalents for those incidents that we need to work through. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement inside of the service request process. You should always be identifying them and then implement them to provide faster fulfillment times and take advantage of automation whenever possible. This allows you to make sure your policies are established properly, and if you have proper policies, this is going to make sure your service requests can be fulfilled with limited or even no additional approvals so that fulfillment can be streamlined, optimized, and process automated. This is a great way of doing things. It minimizes the overhead and ensures the customer gets what they need as quickly as possible. Now, the expectations from users regarding fulfillment times should be clearly set and delivered based on what the organization can realistically deliver. For example, if you buy a voucher from my site, I tell you that you can get it in under 10 minutes if it's in stock. If it's not in stock, you're going to have to wait 1 to 2 days because we have to refill our stock and manually fulfill it. So that's the way we tell you as an expectation to our users, you know what you're getting into. If I didn't tell you that, you'd order it and think it was going to be there in 5 seconds. And if it wasn't, you'd get upset, right? That's the idea here with service request fulfillment. You want to make sure people understand how that fulfillment is going to operate. Now, sometimes your service requests are actually going to be miscategorized. People submit it as a service request, but it really is a change or an incident. In this case, you want to make sure your policies and your workflows are set up properly so they can redirect those service requests over to the incident management process or to the change management process as appropriate. Also, some of your service requests are going to require additional authorization, and that might be based on your financial, information security, or other policies. Going back to the example of a bigger monitor, you want to go from a 15-inch monitor to a 27-inch monitor. There may be a cost associated with that, so you can't get that approval on your own. Instead, you put it in as a service request, and that goes to your boss, who then approves the financial part of it. Or maybe I wanted to get access to the accounting share drive. Well, that's an information security concern, so somebody from accounting is going to have to approve that concern. Service request management is going to depend on well-defined processes and procedures, as I've been talking about. The more you can do this, the better you can track and automate all of these requests, minimizing the manpower involved. And your service requests can have simple workflows or very complex workflows. It really depends on how you need to do it based on your organization, what changes and what approvals need to be placed in there. You want to make sure all the steps to fulfill these requests are well known and proven. You've tested it, you made sure it worked, you optimized it, and then you automated it. Your service provider can always agree to fulfillment times and provide clear status to their users. You want to make sure you're always using that engage arm so that you're telling your users what to expect. If you give them a good expectation of when it should be, that's going to help clear up a lot of the confusion and a lot of the angst that your customers may have. When you're thinking about your service requests, remember, a lot of these can be done through a self-service experience. Things like password resets, asking for more share drive space. A lot of these can be completely fulfilled with automation. So when you're doing service request management, think about automation. I think you've heard me say that a lot in this lesson, but it's really important inside this. Also, I want you to leverage your existing workflow models whenever possible so you don't have to start building things from scratch. Anytime you have something, even if it's a manual fulfillment process, start looking at it, how can you optimize it, and then how can you automate it. So I know we just covered a lot in service request management, but we're going to talk about it now from the value chain perspective. When we think about it from Improve, how is this going to relate? Well, in this case, service request management can provide us a channel for improvement initiatives. We can get complaints and comments from our users, and then we can contribute that into the improvement process so that we can find those trends and think of how we can make things better in the future. When we think about it from the engage perspective, we want to make sure that service request management is including regular communications to tell the users what they can expect, what are the requirements, what are the expectations, and what is the status. When we think about this from the design and transition perspective, we have these standard changes to services that we're requesting, and we're initiating them and fulfilling them as service requests. Also, in Obtain and Build, when I'm requesting something, it has to be fulfilled. And it's going to be fulfilled, that means we might have to go buy something, obtain, or build it under the build. And this is the way we're going to do things as a tie-in to that service. And then finally, when we talk about deliver and support, service request management makes a significant contribution to our normal service delivery because this activity is going to tell our users all the things we can do for them and allow those things to be requested. You might want a bigger monitor. You might want more share drive space. You might need a user account. All of these things are things that we can do and ensure the users get what they need to be productive and make sure that we fulfill those needs. That's what service request management is all about, making sure the users are getting what they need so that they can operate at peak efficiency. IT asset management. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the practice of IT asset management. And this starts the ones that we're going to talk about from the recall only. So what you need to know from this lesson is really to memorize the purpose of IT asset management. And that is to plan and manage the full life cycle of IT assets to help the organization maximize value, control costs, manage risks, support decision-making about purchases, reuse, and retirement of assets, and meet the regulatory and contractual obligations. But in addition to memorizing that purpose, you also need to memorize the term IT asset that was used in that purpose. What's an IT asset? Well, an IT asset is any valuable component that can contribute to the delivery of an IT product or service. Now, when we think about IT asset management, what I want you to think about is the fact that it's like inventory. We want to know all of the different components that are out inside our organization and what they're doing for us. Because if I know what they all are, I can help maximize the value. I can control the costs, I can manage the risks, and I can support decision-making about future purchases. So if I think about it in my company, we've got a bunch of computers that we use. Well, I need to keep track of that computer and how old it is. So I know that, hey, in 3 years, I need to replace that computer. That's going to cost X amount of dollars. So we need to start budgeting for that. IT asset management helps us do that. It helps us plan and manage the full life cycle of these IT assets, from purchase to use to retirement, and then replacement. That's the whole concept here. And again, any asset that is a valuable component can be considered an IT asset. If it's going to contribute to the delivery of an IT service or a product, it's part of our IT assets. That might be mobile phones, servers, network gear, racks, switches, computers, laptops, desktops, monitors, you name it, it's probably an IT asset. Monitoring and event management. This is another one that you have to recall the purpose of, and there's a term that we're going to have to define. Let's start with the purpose. The purpose of monitoring and event management practice is to systematically observe a service or a service component and record and report selected changes of state identified as events. And events is the word that we're going to have to define. Now, this practice identifies and prioritizes infrastructure, services, business processes, information security events, and then it establishes the appropriate response to those events, including responding to the conditions that could lead to potential faults or incidents. Event management is really important for us. And this brings us to the term that we need to memorize. This one is called an event. An event is any change of state that has significance for the management of a configuration item, or a CI, or an IT service. For example, an event might be when you log in successfully, or when you fail to log in successfully. It might be that the bandwidth is exceeded for a certain threshold. It might be that the free space on a server gets below a certain threshold. These are all things that could be events. We want to make sure that we take some action based on these events. And depending on what the event is, that's going to tell us what we need to do. The event might be something that's informational, or it might be a warning, or it might be an alert, depending on the severity. If it's something informational, like we had a successful login, that's fine. We don't have to take any action. We might just log it. But if we have something like a login failure that happened 3 times, that might become a warning, and we want to figure out why did that account try to log in 3 times incorrectly. If we have something like the free space on a server gets below 10 gigabytes, that might be an alert because it might cause the server to crash if we run out of disk space. That's the idea here with the event and monitoring. We want to make sure we understand what events there are and we monitor them to decide what actions need to be taken. Some of those actions need to go out and get into the problem management perspective or the incident management perspective. But again, here inside of the event monitoring, we're really focused on the event, which is any change in state that has significance for the management of a configuration item, a CI, or an IT service. The release management practice. This is another one that you have to recall the purpose of. So what is that purpose? Well, the purpose of release management practice is to make new and changed services and features available for use. Basically, it's going to provide us some set of processes that we're going to have to go through to get the thing from the design all the way out until it's finally live in the environment. Generally, this will involve having a release plan. We'll have the new or changed infrastructure, new or changed software, and new or changed documentation and training given to us, and then we'll be able to put it into the deployment and release process. And this is where we're going to review it and eventually release it so that it can be deployed into the environment. That's the whole purpose of release management. We don't want things to just get put out into the environment without us knowing about it. We want to properly transition them and take them from design through testing and transition out and then be released into the operation environment and make sure that the service desk is ready to support it inside deliver and support. Service configuration management. This is another practice that you have to recall the definition for. The purpose of the service configuration management practice is to ensure that accurate and reliable information about the configuration of services and the CIs, known as configuration items, that support them is available when and where it's needed. So when I think about this, first we want to talk about what is a CI. Well, a CI is any component that needs to be managed in order to deliver an IT service. This might be a server, it might be a switch, it might be a desktop, it might be a laptop. All of these could be configuration items. And the way that we track these is as a single configuration item, like your desktop computer with Windows 10 and 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte hard drive is a single CI in most cases for most organizations. So this is the idea here that we have to think about as we're tracking our service configuration management. Now, as we figure out what our service configuration management is, and we know what all these CIs are and how they're configured, that means anytime we want to make a change to them through change control, this is going to feed back into the service configuration management so we can update our database and know exactly what devices and what assets we have all throughout our organization so we can get the most value from them. Availability management. This is one that you don't have to recall for the exam. Instead, this begins the ones that we're going to talk about for your general awareness. What is availability management? Well, it's a practice to ensure services are delivered at agreed upon levels of availability to meet the needs of customers and users. When we talk about availability, we're talking about the ability of an IT service or other configuration item to perform its agreed upon function when it's required. For example, if you want to go to my website right now, you want to make sure that when you type in diontraining.com, the website comes up and you can read things. That means it's available. We aim to have 99.999% availability, which means that our website is up at least the entire year minus 5 minutes. That's a pretty big ask, right? To do that, we use load balancers, we use multiple redundant servers, and all sorts of cloud infrastructure to make sure our server is up and running anytime you're trying to get to it. That's what we're trying to do with availability. And availability management is simply the practice to ensure that that happens. Business analysis. This practice is one that you don't need to know for the exam, but we're covering it for your general awareness. Business analysis is the practice of analyzing a business or some element of that business to define its needs and recommend solutions to address those needs or to solve a business problem. This will help you to create value for your stakeholders. So when I think about business analysis, you're thinking about this outside of the IT realm. Normally, you're thinking about dollars and cents. How can I solve some sort of business problem? And that might be with a technological solution, but it might be with an organizational solution, or it might be with a new marketing plan, or whatever it happens to be. The business analysis, the reason it's put under this technical heading inside this category is because it often relies heavily on lots of facts and lots of figures, and they use a lot of technology to do the analysis. But the actual analysis itself is more of a management function than a technical function. Capacity and performance management. This is another one that you don't need to know for the foundation level exam. But we're going to cover it so you have a good understanding because it is one you're going to run across inside the real world. So the purpose of capacity and performance management practice is to ensure that services achieve the agreed upon and expected performance, satisfies the current and future demand in a cost-effective way. When we talk about performance, this is a measure of what's achieved by delivering a system, a person, a team, a practice, or a service to do some sort of function. So if I'm talking about service performance, this is associated with the number of service actions performed in a given time frame, and the time to fulfill that service action at a given level of demand. Going back to my voucher example, when you order a voucher, our service performance metric is that you have it in your hand within 10 minutes. That's really quick, right? Generally, you're going to get it in less than 30 seconds, but sometimes it's a little longer. Now, when we talk about capacity, on the other hand, and we look at our service capacity, this is the maximum throughput that a configuration item or service can deliver. So if I'm talking about the capacity of your hard drive, it's how much data you can store. If I'm talking about the capacity of your network connection, it's how fast it is. Is it 100 megabits per second? Is it 1 gigabit per second? Whatever it happens to be, that would be your maximum throughput for that configuration item. Now, as we go through and we look at our capacity and our performance management, this is where a lot of the metrics come into place. If you're working in a technical realm and you're measuring server capacity and server performance, there's going to be lots of different metrics you're going to get. I want to warn you again, don't just measure the outputs, measure the outcomes. What is important of all these metrics and measurements? Why are we measuring them? What are we hoping to achieve? Oftentimes in capacity and performance management, people lose sight of the bigger picture and they focus so hard on the individual metrics of capacity and performance that it becomes useless. So I want to warn you against that. But in the real world, you are going to run into capacity and performance management a lot, especially if you're a system administrator or a network administrator, because those are things that you're trying to meet those particular standards inside capacity and performance to meet the metrics you're given. Service catalog management. This is another one that you don't need to know for the foundation level, but we're going to cover it briefly here. The practice of providing a single source of consistent information on all of your services and all of your service offerings and ensuring that's available to the relevant audience is what's known as service catalog management. So for example, if you come to my website, you can see our service catalog. You're our relevant audience. You're going to see all of the different courses we have and the different types of practice exams and labs and the different types of video courses. All of that is shown as part of our service catalog. And you can make a choice based on that of which offerings you want to use and which ones are relevant for you. Now, if I was running a large IT organization, I would have a lot of different things in my service catalog. I might have a desktop component. I might have a laptop component. I might have the fact that I need a mobile component like a smartphone. And you could go into the service catalog and say, I need one iPhone that gives me X amount of bandwidth and X amount of service so I can do these things. And you can order that from the service catalog based on that particular service offering. As you go and look at any IT company you deal with, I want you to look at what offerings they have. And you're going to see that this service catalog management is what's at the heart of it. This is where we're going to say, we're bringing on a new product next month. We'll list it in the catalog now so you know it's coming. Or we're going to retire this product next month. We're going to list that now that this is ending soon. So if you want to order it, you better get it now because it's going away in 3 months. This is the idea here when you talk about service catalog management, telling people what is coming, what is being taken away, and what is currently available. Service continuity management. Again, this isn't on the exam, but it's a good one to know. The purpose of service continuity management is to ensure that the availability and performance of a service is maintained at a sufficient level in the event of a disaster. Now, what exactly is a disaster? Well, it's a sudden, unplanned event that causes great damage or serious loss to an organization. This might be a natural disaster, like a hurricane or an earthquake, or it could be a disaster of a more modern technological flavor, like a hacker or a data breach. Either way, if it causes a sudden, unplanned event that causes great damage or serious loss, this would go under your service continuity management. This practice is going to provide you with a framework for building your organization's resiliency and ensure that you have the capability of producing the effective response that's needed to safeguard the interests of your key stakeholders and your organization's reputation, your brand, and your value-creating activities. So my website, for instance, we have multiple copies of that server. We have them backed up online and offline. We have redundant servers and load balancers so that hopefully, even if one server goes down, the other ones can carry the load and get us through the disaster until we can recover the server. That's the idea when you're talking about this service continuity management. What things are you doing to make sure your availability and your performance remain up at a sufficient level so you're not going to lose time, money, or value for your customers whenever there's a disaster? Service design. This practice is another one inside this category that we're going to discuss for your general awareness, but it isn't covered on the exam. Now, service design is the practice of designing products and services that are fit for purpose, fit for use, and that can be delivered by the organization and its ecosystem. Let's break that down a little bit because there's a couple of key terms in there that we might recognize. First, fit for purpose. What does that remind you of? That's right, utility. Fit for purpose is utility. We want to make sure that our products have good utility. They do what we need them to do. We also have fit for use in this definition. What's fit for use? Well, that's warranty. We want to make sure that it meets all of the standards and requirements that we were given as part of our warranty. And then finally, we have this delivered by the organization and its ecosystem. What's that talking about? It's saying that we have the capability of doing it. For example, we are a training company. We have a lot of capabilities that we can do. Should we be doing video hosting? Well, that's probably not one of our core capabilities. So instead, we're not going to design that service that we are going to do it in-house. Instead, we would design it to outsource that part of our brand. That way, we can still make sure we have a service that is fit for use, fit for purpose, and it can be delivered effectively by our ecosystem, meaning our partners and suppliers, as opposed to us, the organization ourselves. That's the idea with service design. You want to think about your products and services and how you can best build them and design them so that you're getting the best warranty and utility for your organization. Service validation and testing. This is our final practice in this section. Now again, this is not one you need to know for the exam, but just for your general awareness. Service validation and testing is the practice of ensuring that new or changed products and services meet the defined requirements. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say I was going to build a new website. Before I put it out there for public release, I would want to make sure we went through some sort of service validation to make sure everything's working properly. And we'd go through some beta testing to ensure we tested it in-house, we brought in some external testers, and it was doing everything the way that we needed it to. That's the idea in service validation and testing. Before you go and transition this into the live environment, you want to make sure everything is operating properly. And then once you transfer it over to the live environment, you go back and validate it to make sure it's still operating the way you designed it. That's all service validation and testing really comes down to. It's making sure you're testing things before you release them and after you release them to make sure they're operating the way you designed them. Technical management practices. This is our third and final category of practices under Itil 4. Technical management practices have been adapted from technology management domains for service management purposes by expanding or shifting their focus from a technology solution to an IT service. Under Itil 4, there are only 3 technical management practices covered. These are the deployment management, infrastructure and platform management, and software development and management practices. For the exam, only the deployment management practice, though, is testable, and it's only examinable at the recall level. For that reason, this is going to be a very short and quick section of the course. Deployment management. This is a recall level of difficulty for the exam. The purpose of the deployment management practice is to move new or changed hardware, software, documentation, processes, or other components to the live environment. It may also be involved with deploying components to other environments for testing or staging. Basically, we used to have release and deployment as one practice, but in Itil 4, release and deployment are now 2 different things. Release is more focused on the approval process, where deployment is more about moving the change over into the live environment. And so that's really what we're going to focus on inside deployment management. As I build a new server or I build a new capability, it's going to go through the change process, it's going to get approval, it'll go through the release management process, and eventually it will get deployed through deployment management and move itself from transition into the deliver and support perspective. Infrastructure and platform management. Now, this practice is another one you do not need to know for the exam, but instead we are going to cover it so you at least have heard about it and you'll understand it a little bit if somebody asks you about it. When we talk about the infrastructure and platform management practice, it's really responsible for overseeing the infrastructure and the platforms that are used by the organization. Now, what this really means is that it's going to enable the monitoring of the technology solutions that are available, including solutions from third parties. So when I think about the platform or the infrastructure, I think about the servers, the software, the network, all of that stuff. Well, the people who are monitoring it to make sure it's up and working properly, that is part of infrastructure and platform management. This tends to be a very technical domain, and it's one that's covered by technical personnel who are responsible to make sure the systems are up and running at all times. Normally, this is people inside your network operations center or your security operations center. Our third technical management practice is software development and management. And again, this one is not covered by the exam. The software development and management practice is responsible for ensuring that applications meet stakeholder needs in terms of their functionality, their reliability, their maintainability, their compliance, and their auditability. So whether we're developing it in-house or we're going to be deploying other people's software into our environment, it's going to be handled through this practice. So if I'm going to go ahead and install Windows Server 2019, that is going to be done and managed through software development and management. We're going to make sure that that software meets our functionality needs, our reliability needs, our maintainability needs, our compliance needs, and our auditability needs. Now, we're not going to be the ones who are going to push that out into the environment. That's going to happen through release and deployment management. But we are going to make sure we're tracking it all along the way, and we know what applications are out there that are meeting our stakeholders' needs. We've come a long way throughout this course, and in this lesson, I want to put it all together. We started out talking about our 4 dimensions of service management, which include organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, and the value stream and processes. Then we talked about the Itil service value system. This included our opportunity and demands as our input, and those were shaped by our service value chain, our governance, our practices, our guiding principles, and our continual improvement. And out the other side, we got value. Now, we also dug into the service value chain itself as part of the service value system. We explored the different parts of it, like engage, plan, improve, design and transition, obtain and build, deliver and support, and our products and services. And then we spent the last 3 sections of this course looking at the 34 different practices across Itil 4. But now it's time for us to put it all together. So let's walk through a real-world scenario with an incident that needs to be resolved and see how everything we talked about so far will be integrated together to create the desired value. Now, let's pretend that we work for a large logistics company, something like Walmart or Amazon, and we're part of their IT service management organization within the company. They have a warehouse that uses a Wi-Fi network in order to allow the forklift driver to receive instructions on his mobile device that tells him which aisle and which rack the product is that he needs to go pick up. Unfortunately, the wireless access point that supports the Wi-Fi in this area of the warehouse isn't working so well, and so the driver's mobile device can't get the information that he needs. Now, this has a significant impact on our business because whenever that forklift driver can't receive the instructions quickly enough, there's a risk that a tight business deadline might be missed. After all, some companies like Amazon rely on their super fast shipping as a core function of their business model. Now, while this may seem like a relatively straightforward incident, it can't be resolved simply by following the steps of a predetermined incident management procedure. Instead, there's a lot of interconnections among the practices and the activities for this wireless network to get fixed and return to normal operations. So let's get started with the service value system first. First, we're going to see that we have a demand. And in this case, the warehouse manager and the forklift driver discovered the Wi-Fi coverage isn't working properly in a certain portion of the warehouse. This means the forklift driver needs to drive back to the manager's office in between each pickup so he can find out the location of his next product within the warehouse. This is causing delays, and that could cause delivery deadlines to be missed. This is an incident. From this demand, we now move to the engage activity, where the warehouse manager is going to call up the service desk. The service desk agent listens to the issue that's being described by the warehouse manager, they log it as an incident in the incident management system, and they categorize that incident as a high priority. The agent then lets the warehouse manager know that they're going to escalate the issue to the technical support team that's responsible for that wireless network, and they provide them updates every 2 hours until that issue is fixed. Now, the service desk agent escalates the ticket for the wireless network up to the wireless network support team. These are the folks who have the delivery and support function in the value chain activity for this wireless network. This allows the service desk agent to provide the information to the network support engineer, and the diagnosis and analysis of the incident is going to begin by that engineer. Next, the network support engineer identifies that the wireless access point has failed, and she decides to replace it with a spare from the existing spare parts inventory. This action alone is going to involve several practices. First, we have the IT asset management practice, so that she can update the serial number in the configuration item database. Then she goes through the service configuration management practice because she needs to configure this device based on the approved baseline and install it. She's also going to go through the change control practice since she's going to install a new piece of equipment into the network. And of course, she's going to go through incident management because she's working on resolving an incident. Let's assume that the replacement of this wireless access point is considered a standard change, so no additional approvals are needed. If it was a normal change, then we would have to go through and get approval through the change management process, or escalate that issue as an emergency change. Either way, all of this would occur within the change control practice though, right? Finally, our network engineer replaces the access point, verifies that it's working, and she updates the incident management system. She then calls the service desk agent and tells her that she believes the incident has been resolved. Now that the engineer has fixed the incident, she sits back and thinks about what happened, and she thinks about any possible ways that she could have fixed this more efficiently. If she thinks of any, she might add those to the continual improvement register as suggestions for future improvements. If she does this, this becomes part of continual improvement practice and the improve activity. Now, the service desk agent, on the other hand, goes back to the engage activity by contacting the warehouse manager, and she tells him that the wireless network should be working again. She asks the manager to verify that the forklift driver's mobile phone is working again and gets the confirmation of this, and when she does, she can then close that incident fully. Now, when we look at the final block on the service value system, that's value. The value is being co-created by ensuring the wireless coverage is restored and the forklift driver can now perform his job more efficiently once again by using that mobile device to identify the location of the products that he needs to pick up and move. About an hour later, that warehouse manager might receive a brief email asking for a user satisfaction survey. This might ask for his feedback on the incident and its resolution. This would become an engage activity again, right? Well, if he fills out the survey, we can then take that and based on the feedback received, we can identify trends and patterns based on satisfaction scores and the user's comments. This would fall under our improve area, and we're going to be determining if our incident management system and our processes are working effectively. So that was a lot. As you can see, all of this ties together, and we enter and leave different activities and different practices all throughout this single incident and its single resolution. It isn't a simply linear process, but instead we're bounced from engage to deliver and support, back to engage, over to improve, and many of the practices several times during this quick example. Remember, identifying and understanding all of these interconnections is the key to establishing and promoting good service management. So when you're looking at one of your processes or one of your workflows, you need to consider all of these things as you're laying it out so you can make sure you're doing it the most efficient and effective way possible. Congratulations, you did it! You've reached the end of the course. Together, we have spent a lot of time as we've gone through 100 lessons of videos and quizzes to teach you everything you need to know for the Itil 4 Foundation exam. Now, if you're like most students, you're getting ready to go take that exam. What should you be doing now? First, you should make sure you have that study guide from lesson 1 of the course. In there, we have all of the definitions you need and all of the purposes and all of the terms that are memorization items, as well as all of our notes from the course. If you've been following along as we've gone through the course in that guide, you've probably highlighted it and taken notes, which is great. Then I want you to take some practice exams. I've included a couple of them in this course, and I want you to make sure you're taking those and seeing where you score. If you're scoring 75% or 80% or higher, you're ready to take the real certification exam. If you're not, you may want to get a couple more practice exams and keep practicing because that exam is expensive. And so another $10 or $15 to get some practice exams might be worthwhile so you can practice more with some new questions. Once you feel confident, I want you to get your voucher and schedule your exam. Set a date in stone so you know when you're going to take it. That will help you study better and more efficiently. So once you pass the exam, let me know how you did. I'd love to hear about it, and I hope to see you in a future course. Good luck. Now that you've finished the Itil 4 Foundation, you may be wondering what comes next. Well, the Itil path has several different exams that lead you up to what we call the Itil Master Certification. And you'll see here on the screen, there's actually two distinct paths. There's a left path and a right path. Let's go ahead and start with the left path. Now on the left side, you're working up from Itil Foundation up to what's known as the MP, or Itil Managing Professional. The Itil Managing Professional, to earn that certification, you have to earn 4 Itil Specialist certifications. Each one of these has their own exam for them. Now the Itil Specialist for Create, Deliver, and Support, Itil Specialist for Drive Stakeholder Value, Itil Specialist for High Velocity IT, and Itil Specialist for Direct, Plan, and Improve. As you take all 4 of these exams and you pass them, once you get all 4, you are now known as an Itil Managing Professional. Now if we look on the right side, you can also become an Itil Strategic Leader. An Itil Strategic Leader is mostly focused on management and leadership, and it has only 2 requirements for that. You'll have to get the Itil Specialist for Direct, Plan, and Improve, and the Itil Leader certification for Digital and IT Strategy. Now, you may have noticed that one of those exams is shared on both sides of the chart. We have the Itil Specialist for Direct, Plan, and Improve, which is found on both the Managing Professional path and the Strategic Leader path. So when it comes down to it, if you've already gotten the Managing Professional, it's only one more exam, the Itil Leader, that will then get you to being a Strategic Leader, and when you put both of those together, that then brings you up to being an Itil Master. So the entire pathway is laid out before you. Which should you go for next? Well, that's really up to you and what you do in your organization. Based on the job that you're doing, you're going to want to pick the Itil Specialist or Itil Leader certification that most aligns to the role you're doing. And then you'll learn the other roles, be able to get those certifications as well, and work your way up to being an Itil Master.